The late summer dusk of Atlanta settled over the city like a velvet shawl, warm and dusky lavender, brushing gently against the windows of Maya Jefferson's loft. The lights of the skylines shimmered beyond the glass, peach, gold, electric blue, reflecting a city pulsing with ambition and reinvention. Inside her 10th floor sanctuary in Midtown, the air felt charged too, though for far different reasons. Maya moved through the open concept space with the quiet precision of a woman who knew exactly what image she wanted to cast tonight. Not because the evening mattered to her emotionally, not anymore, but because presentation mattered in ways Ethan Cole had never truly understood. Her hands, elegant and steady, lit the last of the tapered candles arranged along the walnut dining table. Their flames flickered softly, casting golden halos along the matte black plates and hand-cut crystal glasses. It was a setting designed to look effortlessly intimate, the kind of atmosphere people assume belonged to a couple deeply in love, not one quietly fracturing from the inside. There was artistry in this illusion, and Maya, once a curator of stories and symbols, knew the power of a flawless stage. Behind her, the kitchen counters gleamed. A bottle of Napa Cabernet breathed patiently beside a slate board arranged with olives, figs, and the chèvre dusted with thyme she knew Ethan liked. A slow-cooked tenderloin rested beneath a foil tent, filling the loft with a warm, savory aroma that could almost make her believe they were preparing for a normal birthday, a celebration between two people who still shared the same heart. But that fantasy had shattered 3 weeks ago. And tonight, Maya was not here to pretend. She was here to finish something. She stepped back from the table and surveyed the room one final time. The loft glowed with understated beauty, soft overhead pendants, pale oak floors, and the artworks she'd collected before her life began orbiting Ethan's. Pieces vibrant with color and emotion, painted by Black women whose names Ethan had once called too niche. She'd left them in storage for years at his suggestion. Now they hung unapologetically across every wall. "Perfect," she whispered, though the word held an edge that had nothing to do with aesthetics. On the far side of the room, Ethan's birthday gift sat wrapped in silver paper, a first-edition photography book he'd once admired. It was thoughtful, sentimental, another part of the performance she'd perfected since discovering his affair. This evening required grace so seamless, so serene, that no one would suspect the storm she carried beneath her ribcage. A notification chimed from her phone, a message from Naomi. "We're on our way." Maya inhaled, slow and steady. The first guest would arrive soon, and then, eventually, Lily, Ethan's protégé, the woman he thought he could hide. From across the loft, a sound, the familiar turn of a key. Maya's spine straightened. Ethan stepped inside, his silhouette breaking against the halo of city lights behind him. Tall, sandy-haired, still commanding that effortless confidence that had once melted her in ways she no longer cared to admit. His suit jacket was slung over one arm, his tie hung undone. Exhausted maybe, distracted certainly. Guilty, though he didn't know she could see it like a watermark across his face. "Maya," who said, softening his voice in that way he saved for moments when he needed her to be pliable. "The place looks incredible." "Thank you." She turned toward him, her expression gentle, polished, unreadable. "I wanted tonight to be special." He smiled too quickly. "I appreciate that, really." The words floated between them, light as dust, so insubstantial they almost disappeared. Maya walked past him to adjust a candle, masking her need for distance with choreographed grace. "Everyone should be here soon," she said. "Jordan and Naomi first, then Priya." He hesitated. She felt it rather than saw it. "And Lily?" he asked, barely disguising the strain beneath his composed tone. Maya's smile was a work of art, soft, sincere, and sharp enough to draw blood without anyone noticing. "She confirmed this afternoon. She's looking forward to celebrating you. Ethan's breath caught. A tiny sound. Barely there, but to Maya, it was a crack, echoing through the foundation of everything he tried to build in secret. She didn't react. She didn't give him a single thread to pull. Instead, she glided toward the kitchen island, reaching for the stemless wine glass she'd set aside for herself. "Why don't you shower?" she suggested lightly. "You'll want to look your best tonight." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her a moment too long, trying and failing to read her, trying to persuade himself that nothing was wrong. When he disappeared down the hall, Maya pressed one hand against the cool marble counter and let her breath out in a slow, controlled stream. The evening had begun, and every moment from here, every glance, every gesture, every word, was a step toward the truth she intended to unveil. But for now, she remained the elegant hostess, the devoted wife, the woman Ethan underestimated one time too many. Outside, Atlanta glimmered. Inside, a reckoning simmered beneath candlelight and wine. For those captivated by stories of love, betrayal, and the quiet power of rebirth, feel free to like, comment, and follow. There's so much more unfolding, and you won't want to miss a single moment as Maya's world begins to shift. 3 weeks before the candles in crystal and carefully curated smiles, the morning had begun like any other. Soft light seeped through the sheer curtains of the bedroom, washing the walls in pale gold. The ceiling fan whispered a slow, steady rhythm above her, and for a moment, half awake, Maya floated in that peaceful in-between place where nothing hurts yet, where the world is still gentle and unnamed. Then she reached for Ethan. Her hand met only cool cotton sheets and the faint imprint of his body. His side of the bed was empty, pillow already losing his shape. She blinked, fully waking now, and turned her head toward the clock on the nightstand. 6:02 a.m. He'd been gone for a while. Maya lay there for another breath, listening to the quiet. No shower running, no drawers opening, just the muted hum of the city rising beneath them and the soft, distant thud of footsteps in the hallway outside their loft as neighbors started their days. Ethan had always been an early riser, hungry for the day like it was something to conquer. Back when they lived in Chicago, he used to joke that sleeping past 7 felt like leaving money on the table. In Atlanta, nothing had changed. There was always another investor to meet, another pitch to polish, another metric to obsess over. It was not unusual for him to slip out for a run before she woke. Not unusual at all. And yet, that morning, a faint unease curled low in her stomach, like a muscle tensing just before a cramp. She couldn't have explained why. There was no voice in her head, no ominous premonition, just a heaviness that made getting out of bed feel harder than it should. She inhaled slowly, pushed the covers back, and swung her legs over the edge of the mattress. The hardwood was cool against her bare feet as she rose and slipped into the soft robe hanging on the back of the door. The loft was quiet as she padded down the hallway, tying the sash around her waist. In the living area, dawn was just beginning to tint the sky beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city into a watercolor of blues and faint coral. Atlanta's early light was kinder than Chicago's had been, less harsh, more forgiving. The kitchen greeted her with the faint scent of coffee grounds and the clean, orderly comfort she always appreciated. Mugs stacked neatly, knives aligned on the magnetic strip, a bowl of lemons bringing a small sunburst of color to the counter. And there, on the marble island, was Ethan's tablet. The device lay face up, screen awake, as though he had just stepped away for a moment. A tiny strip of light pulsed at the top where new notifications appeared. Messages were stacked in a neat, damning column. She moved closer without thinking, intending only to lock the screen and push it aside. Ethan hated when his devices died. He guarded battery life like a dragon hoarding gold. But before her fingertips reached the tablet, another message slid into view. From Lily P. "You sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Maya froze. The words were small, ordinary, harmless looking. They might have been about anyone, anything. Yet they hit with the force of a speeding car, her breath flattening in her chest as if the air had been knocked out of her. Her pulse thudded in her ears. For one suspended second, she hovered on the edge of refusal, an instinctive urge screaming, "Don't look, don't know, let the illusion live." Then another message appeared from Ethan. No, she's too focused on her community projects and gallery stuff to notice. Maya likes her world organized. As long as everything looks stable, she's happy. The letters blurred. The room tilted. Her fingers curled against the counter, pressing so hard she felt the sharp edge bite into her palm. Organized, happy, as if she were some delicate instrument that only needed the right environment to hum quietly in the background of his life. Her vision sharpened with a sudden, brutal clarity. She tapped the message thread before she could talk herself out of it. The screen bloomed with months of intimacy that did not belong to her. Hotel confirmations in Austin and Denver. Late-night confessions she had never heard. Jokes built on shared exhaustion and stolen moments. Lily sending photos from her apartment, coffee mug in hand, hair messy, eyes bright with an intimacy that made Maya's stomach twist. Ethan responding with heart emojis and phrases he used to say to her, back when their love felt like a shared secret rather than a job description. She scrolled, each flick of her finger a small violence against the life she thought she knew. I can't wait to see you again. I wish I could wake up with you instead of rushing out before she notices. She's comfortable. You're everything. Comfortable. The word lodged in her throat like a stone. This, then, was what she had become in his private narrative. Not partner, not equal, not the woman who moved cities and bent her career to fit his trajectory. She was comfort, furniture, background. Her hand slipped. The tablet clattered against the marble with a sharp crack that echoed through the quiet kitchen. The sound jolted her body into awareness. Oh, she was shaking. Her knees threatened to give. She braced both palms on the counter and closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe. In, out. In, out. She could almost hear Denise's voice in her head. Don't fold, stand up, and look it in the face. Maya opened her eyes and forced herself to scroll back to the earliest messages. The affair had begun nearly 6 months ago, around the time Ethan had flown to Austin for that urgent product summit. She remembered the way he'd kissed her goodbye at the airport, quick, distracted, already half gone in his mind. At the time, she'd told herself it was stress. Now she knew better. Messages from those first weeks sang with that familiar, feverish energy of something new and forbidden. Ethan, the man who once mocked cliches, had fallen headlong into them. I haven't felt like this in years. I didn't know anything was missing until you. Maya drew in a sharp breath that tasted like copper. She thought of the nights she'd stayed late at community meetings, drafting proposals to bring more black art into public spaces. Pride swelling when Ethan called her my brilliant wife at company events. She remembered how she'd believed him when he said they were a team, that her work mattered just as much, even as her own career slipped further and further from center stage. And all the while, he had been telling someone else that she was the one who made his world feel alive. For a long moment, the temptation rose in her like a wave. To call him, to scream, to shatter something expensive and satisfying. To let her rage burn through the loft until there was nothing left but ashes and the truth. But beneath that wildfire, something steadier glowed. It was not calm. It was not forgiveness. It was a different kind of heat. Measured, deliberate, like metal being forged. Maya straightened slowly, letting go of the counter. She picked up the tablet with careful fingers and placed it exactly where she had found it, aligning the edges with the grain of the marble, as if precision could anchor her spinning thoughts. Her heart still raced, but her hands were no longer shaking. She walked to the window then, drawn to the widening morning outside. The sky had lightened to a soft, hopeful blue, the city beginning to stir in earnest at her feet. Cars moved like sparks along the highways. Somewhere, someone was falling in love. Somewhere else, someone was being betrayed. For the first time, She realized she stood in both stories at once. A small, almost incredulous sound escaped her lips. Half laugh, half broken exhale. He thought she wouldn't notice. He thought she didn't see. He thought her desire for harmony meant she was incapable of war. Maya pressed her fingertips against the glass, feeling the faint warmth of the sun bleeding through. No, she murmured to her reflection, to the city, to the version of herself that had believed stability was the same as safety. I see you now. She turned away from the window and walked back through the loft, each step quieter, more certain. She would not give Ethan a scene he could twist into a story about her being irrational, emotional, unstable. She would not become a caricature in his retelling of this betrayal. If he had decided she was merely comfortable, she would show him how devastating comfort could be when it shattered. In that still, echoing kitchen, Maya Jefferson made a decision. She would not scream. She would not beg. She would not cling to a man who had already chosen someone else. She would plan. Before Atlanta's soft-lit skyline, before the candles and the careful performances, there was Chicago, brisk wind off the lake, steel and glass stretching into a hard, brilliant sky, and a time when everything between them still felt like a beginning. Maya first saw Ethan in a crowded museum atrium, framed by a Calder mobile and a cluster of strangers in expensive coats. It was a Thursday evening lecture on technology and narrative in contemporary art, the kind of event she loved, the air buzzing with conversation, the faint scent of coffee and rain clinging to people's clothes, the murmur of ideas rubbing against each other like flint. At that time, she was curator of community and contemporary practice at the museum, a title that sounded heavy enough to impress donors and vague enough for the board to reshape at will. For Maya, it meant something simple and sacred. She crafted stories in public space. She fought, quietly, persistently, to put work by Black and marginalized artists in rooms that had never been meant for them. She moved through the crowd that evening with an easy assurance, half listening to snippets of conversation, half checking on the AV setup. It was her exhibition, Bodies of Light, a series centered on Black women's self-portraiture that had inspired the talk. She wanted it to be perfect. She didn't notice him until he spoke. In the Q&A, after the panelists had dissected everything from NFTs to the ethics of corporate sponsorship, a man near the back raised his hand. Tall, clean-cut, sandy hair a bit disheveled from the wind. No tie, but a tailored blazer that suggested he knew how much effort to look like he hadn't tried. I run a health tech company, he said, voice smooth but earnest. We talk a lot about data and innovation and disrupting systems. But from what you're saying, it sounds like we're just telling the same story with sleeker fonts. How do you know when you're changing a narrative and when you're just dressing it up? The room hummed with interest. Maya, standing off to the side with her arms folded loosely over her chest, found herself looking at him more closely. His question wasn't new, but the way he asked it, self-aware, almost vulnerable, made her tilt her head. She watched as one of the panelists answered, as the discussion flowed on, but she could feel his gaze drifting occasionally toward the photographs from Bodies of Light lining the walls, their subjects unapologetically luminous. Later, when the formal part of the evening had ended, and everyone drifted into that pleasant orbit of wine glasses and soft networking, he found her near the third photograph, an image of a woman standing in a field at dusk, her natural hair haloed by the last light of day. "Excuse me," he said, and there was something about the way he said it, careful, almost reverent, that made her turn. "You're Maya Jefferson, right? Curator of this exhibition?" She nodded, one brow lifting in quiet curiosity. "Guilty." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made the sharpness of his features seem warmer, more human. "I'm Ethan Cole. I just wanted to say, this is extraordinary. The way you frame these stories, it feels like you're giving people back parts of themselves they didn't know they'd lost." Compliments about her work were not new. She'd heard them in dozens of formulations, from donors, critics, artists, and people who just loved the way color and light could rearrange their insides. But this felt different, not because of the words, but because he seemed genuinely altered by what he'd seen. "Well," she replied, allowing the hint of a smile to touch her lips. "That's the idea. Narrative is power. Who gets to be seen? Who gets to be ordinary? Who gets to be miraculous? It all starts with what hangs on these walls." He looked back at the photograph, thoughtful. "In my world, we pretend data is neutral," he said quietly. "But it isn't. It's just another story someone decided was worth telling." She hadn't expected him to say that, so she asked him what his world was, and he told her about the startup he'd founded in a small, cramped office with 3 friends and a whiteboard full of dreams. A platform aimed at making healthcare more accessible, more transparent. He talked about his father's illness, about bills no one could explain, about watching people drown in paperwork when they were already drowning in fear. Maya listened, and beneath the polished pitch, she heard something unguarded. A boy who had watched someone he loved suffer and vowed to fix a world that seemed indifferent to pain. "You're not just selling apps," she said. "You're trying to rewrite who gets care and how." He looked at her then with an intensity that made the room fall away for a second. "That's the goal," he admitted. "I haven't figured out if we're actually doing it yet, but I want to." That was the first thing that drew her in, not his ambition, but his uncertainty. It made him feel less like one more white man eager to shape the world in his image, and more like someone who understood that some stories weren't his to tell. They talked until the museum staff began dimming the lights, a slow, gentle signal that it was time to leave. He walked her to the coat check, hands in his pockets, asking questions about art and neighborhoods, and the weight of being the only one in the room, more times than she cared to count. "Can I take you to dinner sometime?" he'd asked, as the revolving door spun behind them and the city's night air folded around them both. "I want to hear more about how you see the world, and maybe figure out what I'm getting wrong." Maya had hesitated just long enough to remind herself of her own worth. Then she'd smiled. "One dinner," she said. "I don't consult for free." He laughed. "Fair. I'll pay in food and listen more than I talk." He did, at least at first. Dinner became coffee, became afternoons at the museum, became long walks along the lakefront where their conversations stretched from policy to childhood fears to the comforting specifics of their daily lives. Ethan learned how she curated not just exhibitions, but experiences, how she thought about who felt welcome when they walked into a room. Maya learned how he navigated boardrooms full of people who looked like him, but did not always share his conscience. "I don't just want to build something big," he told her once, as they sat on a bench watching the water move in restless patterns. "I want to build something that matters." "And who decides what matters?" she'd asked, tilting her head toward him. He'd looked at her, smiled slowly, and said, "You, obviously." She'd laughed then, the kind of laugh that slips out unguarded, and somewhere between that sound and the way he reached for her hand, a door opened. They fell in love like people who believed they were too smart to be naive, but were naive all the same. "We could build something new there," he'd said, palms open, eyes searching her face. "New city, new chapter. You'll consult, curate, do your thing on your own terms. We'll have more space, more sun. Doesn't that sound like a life we could love?" She'd thought about it for days, walking through the museum halls she knew by heart, fingers brushing the cool railings, feet echoing softly on polished floors. She loved Chicago. She loved the work, the team, the communities she'd fought to serve. But she loved him too, and he painted Atlanta as a blank canvas they would fill together. In the end, she told herself compromise was what grown-ups did when they chose a shared future. You bend here, they bend there. You leave one city, not because it doesn't matter, but because something else matters more. So she agreed. They packed up their lives into boxes and moving trucks. She wrapped her framed degrees in favorite books. He carried his monitors and whiteboards, and a notebook full of plans. They arrived in Atlanta to a smaller museum scene, to a hot, humid sky that pressed close to the skin, to a loft that felt like possibility. At first, it was exactly what he'd promised. Dinner on the balcony overlooking the city lights, shared jokes about Southern drivers, quiet mornings spent working side by side at the kitchen island, her drafting proposals while he sketched out product maps. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance shifted. His company grew faster than anyone predicted. Each month brought another milestone, another investor, another wave of employees. Each victory pulled him further into a world where his time was no longer his own. Maya's consulting projects, meanwhile, were passed on or postponed. Exhibitions she might have led went to curators who stayed in Chicago. The museum in Atlanta liked her ideas, but not enough to carve a real position for her in their hierarchy. Maybe next season, they said. Our budget is tight this year. Just for now, Ethan would say, kissing her temple as she scrolled job listings at night. Let me get this company stable, and then we'll figure out your dream job. I couldn't have done any of this without you. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him, for a while. She hosted his colleagues, smoothed over tensions, listened to stories of product launches and acquisitions, always ready with a thoughtful comment that made Ethan's world feel sharper, clearer. People told him he was brilliant. He'd smile and later tell her, "You know, half those lines were yours," as if that were enough to keep her tethered to the sidelines. The first time she heard him introduce her at a company event as the reason I'm still sane, she smiled and squeezed his hand. It felt like a sweet acknowledgement, a tribute to her presence in a life that had become increasingly chaotic. The third or fourth time, something in the phrasing began to sting. She wondered when she had gone from curator and storyteller to simply reason, a quiet support beam holding up his narrative. In the photographs from those early Atlanta years, they looked like a portrait of success. His arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder, both of them dressed in the easy, polished style of people who fit the life they'd built. Only in the spaces between those images, small, almost invisible, could you see the compromise tilting ever so slightly out of balance. Her projects rescheduled so she could attend his events. Her applications to residencies she never quite finished. The subtle way he began to say, "my company," instead of "our work," as though somewhere along the way, she had stepped off the stage and into the wings without anyone noticing. Anyone but her. Ethan had always believed that if he just worked hard enough, he could outrun the parts of himself he didn't like. The fear of failure, the gnawing suspicion that he didn't really deserve the rooms he walked into, the hollow ache that followed every success faster than the celebration did. Work, he learned early, was a kind of anesthesia. Ambition, if fed properly, could drown out almost anything. In the beginning, loving Maya had felt like the exception to that rule. He still remembered that first night after the museum talk in Chicago, how she had challenged him without flinching. Most people faced with his pitch about reimagining the healthcare ecosystem either nodded reverently or poked at the edges, testing for weakness. She had gone straight to the heart. "Who gets left out of your solution?" she'd asked, dark eyes steady on his. "Who doesn't show up in your data because the system never counted them properly in the first place?" The question had stung, but in a way that made him feel strangely seen. It was intoxicating, the way she took his big, shiny plans and asked where the shadows were. He'd never wanted to impress anyone the way he wanted to impress her. For a while, that wanting made him better. During those early years, her voice was like a compass. When he drafted company values, he heard her insisting they name who they served, not just what they sold. When he rehearsed investor pitches, he could almost feel her watching, daring him to care about more than valuations and exits. When they moved to Atlanta, he told himself it was for both of them. He could picture it so clearly, his company taking off in a booming tech hub, her building something new in a city steeped in Black cultural history. A partnership, a shared leap. He hadn't lied about wanting that. But the company's rise was rougher and faster than he'd anticipated. What started as a small team became a machine with moving parts multiplying by the month. Departments, deadlines, regulations, lawsuits narrowly avoided. Some days it felt as though he was holding back an ocean with his bare hands. He told himself he was doing it for them, for the loft, the future, the life. When he came home late and found Maya sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and brows knitted in concentration, he would kiss her quickly, apologize, and launch into a story about some crisis at the office. She would close the screen, turn her full attention toward him, and listen. She always listened. He noticed, vaguely at first, that the story she told him about her own work grew shorter over time. A grant proposal delayed. An exhibition she'd hoped to lead going to someone else. A meeting with a director that ended with, "Maybe next year." He heard the words, but he was so busy pushing his own boulder uphill that he didn't always catch the quiet disappointment beneath him. He told himself she was fine, because she said she was, because she smiled, because she hosted, because she made their life look put together when his brain was a perpetual storm. Maya was the constant. He was the one running. And then there was Lily. She arrived at the company during a hiring sprint, a UX designer from Seattle with a strong portfolio and a half-nervous, half-defiant way of presenting her ideas in meetings. She had a habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, and of scribbling interface sketches on napkins during breaks. At first, Ethan barely noticed her beyond the surface facts. Smart, fast, good with users, the kind of person any founder would be glad to have on the product team. But one late evening, they ended up in the conference room together, the city outside reduced to dark glass and scattered lights. He'd stayed to hammer out yet another deck. She'd stayed to finish a prototype before a testing session. You ever feel like this whole thing is going to collapse if you stop sprinting for like 10 minutes? She'd asked, not looking up from her laptop. He laughed, startled. Only 10? She glanced at him then, sharing that weary, conspiratorial grin that only people in the trenches truly understand. I get it, she said. You built this. It must feel like if you breathe wrong, it all goes away. The sympathy in her tone slid under his armor. With Maya, his vulnerabilities felt larger somehow, woven into questions of race and power and history, because she saw the whole scaffolding of the world around them. Her compassion was deep, but it also demanded accountability. When he said he was exhausted, she heard the system grinding gears in the background and reminded him who was crushed beneath him. With Lily, it was simpler, or at least it felt that way. In Lily's gaze, he wasn't the product of compounding privilege and opportunity. He was the guy who stayed late, the one carrying the weight of the world. She told him he was brilliant, that the company would be nothing without him, that no one understood the vision like he did. It was intoxicating, that uncomplicated admiration. He didn't wake up one morning intending to cheat. He told himself that often, especially after. He told himself it just happened, that it was a slow drift, a series of tiny boundary crossings, an extra hour talking after a meeting, a joke that strayed too close to personal, a moment of shared anger at a board decision. When he texted her outside work for the first time, he'd stared at the screen for a full minute before hitting send, heart pounding like he was 22 again. It was about a bug in the app. Only that. Harmless. Her reply came quickly. They kept going. The night it turned into something more, he'd had a brutal call with investors who wanted growth at a clip that made him feel sick. He'd driven home vibrating with adrenaline, walked into the loft, and found it quiet. Maya was at a community forum, moderating a panel on housing justice. He'd forgotten about it. She'd mentioned it days ago, and he'd nodded, brain already elsewhere. He heated leftovers without tasting them, then sat at the kitchen island staring at the darkened window. His phone buzzed. "You okay?" Lily had written. "You sounded off in the stand-up." He typed back before he could think too long. "Rough day. Long story." She answered immediately. I'm still at the office. Want to talk? He told himself it was just a conversation, just debriefing, just strategy. But when he walked into the office again, night heavy on the glass, in the building half asleep, and saw her sitting there in the glow of her laptop, something in him loosened. She listened, eyes wide, nodding at all the right moments, murmuring, "That's so unfair," when he described the pressure, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. At some point, the distance between their chairs shortened. At some point, her hand brushed his arm and didn't move away. At some point, he kissed her. Later, much later, when the guilt came creeping in like fog, Ethan constructed a narrative sturdy enough to hold back his shame. He told himself Maya had drifted first, that she had poured more of herself into the city, into her projects, into the issues she cared about than into their marriage, that their conversations had become heavier, more political, less about him and more about histories and systems he couldn't fix with code. He told himself he was lonely. He told himself he was human. He avoided thinking about the nights Maya had stayed up waiting for him, the texts she'd sent, "You okay? Haven't heard from you?" The way she still kissed him softly in the mornings, even when he barely registered it. When his reflection in the bathroom mirror looked at him with too much accusation, he reminded himself that he was building something important, that great men had always been complicated, that he could love his wife and still need something else. With Lily, he felt young again, sharp and desired. With Maya, he felt known. He told himself it wasn't a choice between them. He could have both. The woman who grounded him and the woman who made him feel like gravity didn't apply. He built elaborate moral arguments to justify it, quiet bargains with his conscience. He would keep providing. He would protect Maya from the knowledge. He would make sure she never hurt. In his mind, this became its own twisted form of care. So when his tablet chimed with Lily's messages, when he typed out assurances that Maya didn't suspect anything, Ethan believed it. He had to. Because the alternative, that she saw him clearly, that she might be quietly gathering the pieces of his betrayal and arranging them into something he couldn't control, was a truth he wasn't yet ready to face. In the days following the discovery, Maya moved through the loft like someone wandering through the echo of her own life. Everything looked the same: the woven throw draped over the sofa, the ceramic bowls she'd bought from a local black artisan, the framed photographs from their early years in Chicago. But each object seemed to vibrate with a new, faintly mocking awareness. Nothing had changed, yet nothing was untouched. She didn't confront Ethan. Not yet. Silence, she realized, could be its own form of power, but she could not hold the weight of this knowledge alone. Not when it pressed against her ribs with each breath, growing heavier by the hour. On the second evening after she'd seen the tablet, long after Ethan had fallen asleep beside her, with the easy, oblivious calm of a man who believed his secrets were still buried, Maya slipped into the living room with her phone and sat on the edge of the sofa in the faint glow of the street lamps. Her thumb hovered for a moment above a single contact. Then she tapped. The screen lit with the familiar image of her older sister, Denise, smiling at the camera with her principal's lanyard hanging around her neck, and her hair swept into the clipped, no-nonsense bun she'd worn since her 20s. When Denise answered, a soft rustle came through the line before her voice. "Maya? Baby, it's late. You all right?" The tenderness in those words fractured something inside her. Maya pressed a hand to her mouth, swallowing the sound rising in her throat. "I'm here," she managed, though her voice was thin, fragile around the edges. "I just needed you." There was a silence, long enough for Maya to hear the shift in her sister's breathing, the quiet recalibration Denise always made when something serious hovered between them. "I'm listening," Denise said gently. Maya closed her eyes. "He's cheating on me." The words did not explode. They did not break her open. They landed with soft gravity, like truth set down on a table. Denise inhaled sharply. "Ethan? With who?" "Someone at work." Her nails pressed into her palm. "Someone younger. Lily." Another silence. Different this time. Tensile. controlled. When Denise spoke, her voice was steady but edged with steel. "Tell me everything." And Maya did. Not every detail, not every message, not the humiliating phrases that still clung like burrs to her skin, but enough. The broad strokes, the betrayal, the indignity, the way he described her as if she were furniture, solid, useful, easily forgotten. When she finished, Denise exhaled a sound somewhere between a groan and a growl. "Men wear a suit and a smile and suddenly think they invented desire," she muttered. "But you are a whole storm, Maya. You think a man like that has the range to appreciate what he has?" Maya let out a weak laugh, shaky but real. "Please don't make me laugh," she whispered. "It hurts." "Oh, sweetheart." Denise's voice softened instantly. "Come home. Spend a few days in Chicago. You don't have to sit in that place with him, breathing all over your oxygen while you're sorting out your heart." "I can't," Maya said. "Not yet. There's too much I need to plan." Denise paused. "Plan?" "Yes." Maya's gaze drifted toward the window, where the city lights blurred into a soft, molten gold. "If I leave, it won't be in pieces. It won't be reactive. It will be deliberate, thoughtful, surgical." A slow breath drifted through the line. "That's our grandmother in you," Denise said. She never believed in burning things down unless she'd already built her escape route. A memory stirred. Her grandmother, Maya Jefferson, with her silver hair coiled into a crown of tight curls, telling stories about organizing in the 60s. "You don't yell when a room full of people expects you to break," she used to say. "You sit taller. You rise quiet. You choose your moment, and then you move the earth." Maya felt the echo of that lineage now, running through her veins like a steadying pulse. Denise added, "Just don't forget, you don't have to be strong every second. You hear me? You don't owe anyone that performance." Maya blinked back tears. "I know, and you're not alone." "I know that too." They talked a little longer about their mother, who would absolutely pack her suitcase at dawn if she heard a single note of pain in Maya's voice. About work, about nothing really, and everything. Eventually they hung up, though the warmth of her sister's presence lingered long after the screen went dark. The next morning, Maya called her mother. She didn't plan to tell her yet, not until she fully understood what she wanted her life to become. But the moment she heard that soft, familiar voice, "Hey, baby girl, you eating? You resting?" Something inside her nearly broke again. Maya didn't tell her the truth, not then. But mothers often hear what daughters cannot speak. "You're quiet," her mother murmured. "He's not wearing you out, is he? You better not be carrying that man's whole emotional load while he runs around chasing meetings." Maya let out a breath, too sharp, too telling. Her mother didn't press. She simply said, "Whatever's happening, remember who you come from. The women in our family don't fold. They bend enough to build bridges, but they don't break for anybody." Maya swallowed. "I remember." After that call, she sat for a long time at the small dining table, fingers tracing the grain of the wood, letting the truth settle. Her family had always been her anchor, steady, loving, the kind of foundation that allowed her to take risks in a world that often demanded twice as much from women who looked like her. They never told her she was too much. They never asked her to shrink. They never questioned her capacity, her intelligence, her heart. Ethan had admired her strength, once. Then, slowly, subtly, he had come to rely on it in ways that left her holding more than her share of their life. But her family reminded her of who she really was, outside his gaze, outside his need, outside the roles she played so carefully. Later that weekend, she met Naomi, her closest friend in Atlanta, for coffee at a quiet, Black-owned cafe in Sweet Auburn. The walls were painted with murals of civil rights leaders, their expressions fierce and unyielding. Naomi arrived in a swirl of curls, a flowing linen dress, and an energy that could brighten any room. She took one look at Maya's face and dropped all pretense of pleasantry. "What happened?" she asked softly, sliding into the seat across from her. Maya stared at her hands. He's been with someone else. Naomi's inhale was a silent, sharp wound. Then slowly, intentionally, she reached across the table and took Maya's hand. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we're here now." Maya closed her eyes, letting the steadiness of that moment ground her. Naomi didn't give advice, didn't fling outrage into the air like sparks. She simply anchored the conversation with empathy, with space, with the kind of presence Maya needed, a quiet witness. "You don't have to rush," Naomi murmured. "Just tell me what you need." "I need to not disappear," Maya said. "Not again." Naomi squeezed her hand gently. "Then don't." As they talked, Maya felt something inside her shift. Not an explosion, not a collapse, a remembering of the girls they once were, of the women they had become, of the promises she had made to herself long before love and ambition tangled into compromise. By the time she left the cafe, she wasn't healed, but she was no longer hollow. She had roots. She had people. She had bloodlines that hummed with resilience, and she had clarity. Ethan might believe she was too content, too organized, too distracted to notice the gaps he created in their marriage. But he did not know the women who stood behind her, the women who raised her, the women who taught her how to rise, quiet and devastating, when the world expected her to shrink. Maya walked back into the Atlanta sunlight, feeling steadier than she had in days. She would not break. She would not dim, and she would not, under any circumstances, play small. Not for Ethan Cole, not for any man, not for anyone who mistook her grace for weakness. A storm was coming, a deliberate one, and she would be the one guiding its path. In the days that followed, a quiet, tempered resolve settled over Maya like a second skin. It did not roar, it did not tremble, it sat beneath her breath, patient, coiled, unmistakably alive. She moved through the loft with a grace so fluid, so practiced, that even Ethan didn't notice the shift. He mistook her composure for routine, the stillness in her eyes for acceptance. He kissed her temple in the mornings, rehearsed product pitches into the mirror, rushed through coffee, and never paused long enough to ask why she watched him with a new kind of distance. He thought she hadn't seen. He thought she hadn't read. He thought she'd stayed the same. But Maya Jefferson had already stepped into a different story, one she was authoring piece by piece, with the precision of a curator assembling an exhibition that would change the room the moment it opened. The first thing she did was call Alma Reyes. Alma was a name whispered among women who needed answers and could no longer wait for truth to reveal itself. She was discreet, brilliant, and unnervingly observant, a former journalist who'd learned how power worked in shadows and decided to make a living pulling those shadows apart. They met at a quiet bar on the rooftop of a boutique hotel, where lavender cocktails arrived with sprigs of rosemary and the noise of the city hummed far below. "You came highly recommended," Maya said, stirring the drink she had barely tasted. Alma smiled. "Women like us look out for each other. Tell me what you need." It wasn't until then that Maya allowed herself to speak the affair aloud, not as wounded confession to family, but as a case, something factual, provable, undeniable. She told Alma about the tablet, the messages, the dates that coincided with Ethan's work trips. She didn't mention heartbreak. She didn't need to. It lived beneath the surface like a bruise. Alma listened without interrupting, her expression composed, fingers steepled lightly on the table. When Maya finished, the investigator nodded slowly. "Infidelity isn't hard to prove," she said. "What's harder is proving patterns, lies, misuse of company funds, exploitation of power." "You can do that?" Maya asked, voice steady though her pulse fluttered. "That's what you're paying me for." Alma's tone held a quiet promise. "Just tell me everything he doesn't know you know." They arranged payment. They discussed boundaries. They planned communication through encrypted channels. Maya left the rooftop bar with the scent of lavender still clinging to her wrist and an unexpected surge of strength in her chest. The second step was securing an attorney. Not just any attorney, but someone who understood the intersections Maya was walking through. Marriage, business, reputation, race, gender, and the quiet violence of being underestimated. That person was Caroline Ng. Maya met her in an office overlooking Piedmont Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the trees like moving artwork. Caroline stood when Maya entered, her hand firm, her eyes sharp. "I've reviewed the preliminary notes you sent," Caroline said. "What you're dealing with is not just adultery. It's negligence. It's breach of trust, possibly misuse of corporate assets. And you, Maya, have far more leverage than you realize." Maya sat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I don't want to destroy him." Caroline's gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding. "Yes, you do," she said gently. "Maybe not out of spite, but out of justice." The truth of that line curled warm and cold around Maya's heart. "What do we need?" she asked. "Documentation," Caroline replied, pulling out a leather portfolio. "Message screenshots, financial logs, timelines, evidence of your contributions to the company." Maya blinked. "My contributions? I never had a formal role." "Maya," Caroline said with deliberate patience, "the company did not grow in a vacuum. Who introduced Ethan to his first healthcare philanthropy partner?" "I did," Maya said slowly. "And who coached him through the pitch for the Midtown Innovation Fund?" "I rewrote the deck." "And the board dinner where he secured the Series B investment? Who curated the entire event? Who selected the venue, the artwork, the guest list?" Maya felt her lungs expand with a realization she'd spent years suppressing. "Me." "Yes," Caroline said. You. You didn't work behind the scenes. You built the scene. And now we quantify it." For the next hour, they walked through her history with Ethan's company. Every favor she'd bent her schedule for, every connection she'd extended, every conference she attended as the graceful, eloquent half of a founder's power couple. "Your grandmother's inheritance," Caroline added, flipping another page. "Ethan mentioned once that it covered the payroll gap during the company's first expansion." Maya nodded. "He said it was temporary." "And was it repaid?" "No." Caroline closed the folder. "Then this isn't just marital misconduct. It's financial partnership, and you're owed equity." If Ethan had been in the room, he would have dismissed that claim as sentimental exaggeration. A generous wife helping out. Nothing official, nothing serious. But Caroline saw the truth. Alma would prove it, and Maya was beginning to claim it. The third step was introspection, the kind Maya rarely allowed herself when life moved too fast to sit still. But now, in the quiet moments between planning and pretending, she peeled back the layers of her heart with the same precision she brought to her exhibitions. She spread receipts across the dining table, literal ones, from Atlanta hotels Ethan never mentioned, and metaphorical ones, from years of compromise. Projects abandoned to support his schedule. Invitations declined because of his demands. Dreams deferred until she could no longer remember what they looked like. She was honest with herself. She had loved him deeply. She had rooted for him, fought for him, believed in what he could become. And maybe that had blinded her to the shadows building behind him. But she would not let that blindness define her future. Her exit would not be a collapse. It would be a strategy, an unveiling, a reclamation. At night, she still lay beside him, her breath even, her face soft with practiced serenity. He curled toward her occasionally, murmuring her name in his sleep. She watched him sometimes, wondering how someone could look so harmless and be holding so many truths she could never trust again. Most mornings, he rushed out before she'd fully woken, leaving a kiss on her forehead that felt like a habit rather than affection. Maya returned to the tablet he no longer guarded so closely, noting dates, collecting breadcrumbs, connecting timelines. Not obsessively, methodically, quietly, without emotional flair. Alma fed her updates at dawn, diner receipts from Austin, overlapping hotel bookings, screenshots Lily had posted on private social media under a close friends list Ethan never anticipated. Expense reports flagged as product testing travel. Caroline refined the legal strategy, protecting Maya's assets, documenting her contributions, preparing for the likelihood that Ethan would attempt to deny everything until faced with irrefutable proof. Together, they formed an invisible triad behind her, a constellation of sharp minds orbiting a single truth. Maya was no longer a woman reacting to betrayal. She was a woman architecting a future beyond it. In the mirror each morning, she caught glimpses of herself she had almost forgotten. The determined set of her mouth, the fire beneath her calm, the lineage of women behind her whispering, "Move with intention, finish what you start." And so she did. With every piece of evidence collected, every document scanned, every memory re-examined and reclaimed, her resolve tightened. She began preparing for the birthday dinner, like a conductor readying an orchestra for its final movement. Not with anger, not with chaos, but with discipline, precision, and a kind of devastating grace. She was not leaving in fragments. She was leaving in full. And when she stepped away from this marriage, she would not just take what she was owed. She would take back every part of herself she had ever given away. The idea arrived not as a lightning strike, but as a quiet, elegant line of thought that simply clicked into place. It was a Tuesday evening, one of those Atlanta nights when the heat lingered even after sunset, laying a soft, humid hand over the city. The loft windows were cracked open just enough to let in a faint breeze and the distant murmur of traffic. The sky outside was a deep indigo, pinpricked with a few brave stars that fought to be seen above the city's glow. Maya stood at the stove, stirring a pot of lemony risotto, while a pan of salmon finished in the oven. Ethan sat at the island, scrolling through emails on his phone, the faint light from the screen painting his face in cool blue. It looked like any ordinary evening between them. Workday clothes softened into comfort, music low in the background, the easy choreography of two people who knew where everything in the kitchen lived. But under the surface, everything had changed. Maya's movements were precise, almost ceremonial. Her mind, however, was not on the food. It traced timelines, calculated leverage, rehearsed possibilities. Alma's latest report sat in her email. Caroline's preliminary strategy notes waited in a folder on her laptop. The scaffolding of her exit was now solid enough to lean against. She sprinkled chopped parsley into the pot, tasted, added salt. Behind her, Ethan cleared his throat. "Hey," he said, as if dropping something casual into the space between them. "So, my birthday." Maya turned slightly, eyebrow arched. "Your birthday?" "Next week," he reminded her with a small smile, almost boyish. "The big 45. I know you've probably already planned a parade or rented a small planet, but," he shrugged, "I don't really want anything major this year." He said it lightly, but the words lodged in her mind. Her hands stilled. "What do you want?" she asked, voice even. "Just a quiet dinner," he replied. "At home, us, maybe a couple of people, Jordan and Naomi, if they're free. Maybe Priya." He glanced up, searching her face. "I'm tired, May. I don't have the energy for a whole event right now." She studied him for a breath. The lines at the corners of his eyes were deeper these days. Stress had carved a permanent tightness between his brows. To someone who didn't know better, it might have looked like vulnerability. Maya knew it for what it was. The strain of a man trying to hold multiple worlds together without acknowledging which one he'd already cracked. "A quiet dinner," she repeated. "We can do that." Relief flickered across his features. "Yeah? Of course." She turned back to the stove. "I'll make something simple. We'll invite the people closest to you. It'll be intimate." She could feel his gaze linger on her back for a moment, as if he was trying to gauge whether intimate was a promise or a threat. When she turned again, her expression was warm, calmly affectionate. The performance was so flawless she almost admired it herself. "Speaking of people closest to you," she added, setting plates on the counter, "who else do you want there? We mentioned Jordan and Naomi. Priya, definitely. He nodded. Yeah, that's really all I was thinking. She wiped her hands on a linen towel, then leaned against the opposite side of the island, casually folding her arms. What about Lily? She asked. His fingers tightened around his phone. It was a small movement, but she saw it, felt it, like a tremor rippling through the room. Lily? He repeated. Yes. She tilted her head slightly, as though the thought had just occurred to her. You talk about her work all the time. Your star UX hire, remember? It might be nice to include someone from the newer side of the team. She's clearly important to the company. For a moment, silence thickened between them. A subtle tension pulsed in the air, almost imperceptible, the way the atmosphere shifts before a summer storm. Well, he began, his voice a fraction too controlled. I mean, I'm sure she has plans, and it's kind of short notice. Maya let a small, apologetic smile soften her expression. True, but it feels a little insular, just inviting the same inner circle. You're always saying the company is growing because of fresh talent. It makes sense to welcome them into our home sometimes, don't you think? His jaw flexed. It's your call, he said, forcing a chuckle. You know I'm fine with however you want to do it. I just don't want you to stress yourself out over a dinner. She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his wrist. I won't. I'm not talking about a gala, Ethan, just a table. Food. People who matter to you. She let her gaze hold his for a beat longer than necessary. If she's important to your work, she's important enough to be invited. There it was again, that flicker, that flash of something raw behind his eyes. Panic, thinly veiled. Calculation, scrambling for footing. He tried to shrug it off. You really don't need to go to all that trouble. It's no trouble, she said softly. I'll email her myself. A personal invitation. It'll mean something. If he refused outright, he would have to offer a reason. And reasons now were dangerous things for him. So he did what men often did when they found themselves cornered by their own lies. He smiled, thin and brittle, and pretended the choice was his. If you'd like to invite her, he said at last, go ahead. That's thoughtful of you. Good, Maya replied. I think it'll make for an interesting mix of people. Later, when dinner was over, and Ethan had retreated to his office under the guise of polishing a deck, Maya cleared the dishes with unhurried efficiency. The repetitive motions soothed the hum of adrenaline still coursing through her. Rinse, stack, wipe. Reset the surface. When the kitchen gleamed again, she poured herself a glass of water and carried her laptop to the small writing desk by the window. The city outside shimmered under its late-night cloak, neon signs flickering, cars threading through the lit arteries of the streets. She opened a new email, addressed it to Lily Park. For a moment, she studied the blank page. This part mattered. The tone had to be flawless, warm, gracious, and utterly devoid of accusation. It had to sound like an invitation from a wife who saw only a promising employee, not a threat occupying the space of her husband's heart. Her fingers began to move. Dear Lily, I hope this note finds you well. Ethan has spoken very highly of your work on the recent product releases, and I've been meaning to reach out for some time to say thank you for your commitment and for the energy you brought to the team. We're planning a small, intimate dinner at our home next Friday to celebrate his 45th birthday. Nothing elaborate, just a few close friends and colleagues who've been an important part of his journey this past year. I would be delighted if you could join us. I always think it's meaningful to connect beyond the confines of the office, especially with people who contribute so much to the work that shapes our lives. Please feel absolutely no pressure. If you already have plans, I completely understand. But if you're free, it would be lovely to have you with us that evening. Warmly, Maya Jefferson. She reread it several times, adjusting a phrase here, softening a word there. The email needed to sound like a woman entirely unaware of the affair, yet entirely confident in her place. No desperation, no suspicion, only graciousness. When she was satisfied, she clicked send. The message flew off into the digital ether, a single arrow loosed from a bow drawn with exquisite care. She leaned back in her chair then, letting her eyes drift closed for a moment. The loft hummed quietly around her. The refrigerator's low murmur, the faraway honk of a horn, Ethan's faint voice on a call in his office. Somewhere across the city, a notification would appear on Lily's phone. From Maya Jefferson. Subject, dinner next Friday? Maya wondered what expression would cross the younger woman's face when she read it. Would it be horror? Guilt? A dizzy kind of relief that she'd been chosen, even in this twisted, precarious way. It didn't matter. The point was not how Lily felt. The point was this. Ethan had built two worlds and believed he could keep them separate. Tonight, with one simple invitation, Maya had begun pulling them together. Not with a scream, not with a scene, with a dinner. She closed her laptop, finished her water, and rose from the chair. On her way to the bedroom, she passed Ethan's office door. It was slightly ajar. She could hear him pacing as he talked, voice tight, the words timeline, pressure, and launch window floating into the hall. For the first time in a long while, she didn't pause to listen. She slipped into bed alone, the ceiling fan turning slow circles above her, and stared at the shadows shifting on the wall. The pieces were moving now, not fast, not recklessly, but steadily, deliberately. The invitation was out, the date was set. Soon, the woman her husband thought he could keep in the shadows would walk through their front door and into the light. The reply came Ethan expected. He was at his desk, eyes blurring as he stared at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense, when his phone buzzed. A new email notification slid across the top of the screen. From Lily Park. Subject, dinner next Friday? His stomach dropped. He shouldn't have known what it was. Maya hadn't mentioned sending the invitation, hadn't told him what she wrote, hadn't asked for his opinion. But the moment he saw Lily's name alongside the word dinner, something primal in him tightened. He opened the email with reluctant fingers. Hi, Maya. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored, honestly. I'd be happy to join you all next Friday. Please let me know if I can bring anything. Best, Lily. Honored, happy. The words turned his mouth to ash. For a moment, he just sat there, feeling the world close in. On the wall, the analog clock he insisted on keeping in his office ticked loud and steady, each second a step closer to a night he could not control. He told himself to breathe. He'd handle it. He always handled things. That night, he brought it up as casually as he could. They were in the living room, Maya curled into the corner of the sofa with a book, her legs tucked gracefully beneath her. A jazz record spun on the turntable, horns low and honey smooth. Warm lamplight painted her skin in gold. He watched her for a moment, searching for some hint of accusation in the relaxed slope of her shoulders, the unhurried way her eyes moved over the page. There was nothing, no tension, no edge. Maya, he said finally, about the dinner. Yes, she asked, marking her place with a finger and looking up at him. I was thinking, he began, choosing his words like stepping stones over a river. Maybe we should scale it back even more. Just us. Maybe Jordan and Naomi. The last few weeks have been a lot. I'm not sure I have the bandwidth for hosting. She studied him for a beat, as though weighing something. Then she offered a gentle, almost apologetic smile. I understand it's been intense, she said, but I've already sent the invitations. People have rearranged their schedules. It would be rude to cancel now. He shifted. We could say something came up. A last-minute trip. Investor emergency. On your birthday, her tone was light, but there was a thread of amused disbelief woven through it. You want to tell your closest friends that you canceled dinner to meet investors? He frowned. When she put it like that, it sounded bad. He could feel his own excuses collapsing under the weight of her calm logic. And besides, she added gently, Lily responded so sweetly. She seemed genuinely touched to be included. I'd hate to make her feel unwelcome. He felt heat rise under his collar. She replied? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Maya's smile deepened by a fraction, warm and untroubled. Of course. I told you I'd invite her personally. She said she's honored to be there. It's good for younger team members to feel seen, don't you think? He swallowed. Yeah, sure. Of course. Good, she said, and opened her book again. The conversation closed as neatly as a door. For the rest of the evening, a quiet hum settled under his skin. He tried to read the news, tried to answer emails, tried to lose himself in metrics and milestones. But his attention kept slipping back to that future scene. Lily in their loft, Lily shaking Maya's hand, Lily sitting at the table where he and Maya had once talked late into the night about art, injustice, impossibility. He hadn't thought this through. He hadn't thought any of it through. Not really. In his comforting fantasy, the two worlds never touched. Maya remained the graceful constant, holding their life together with invisible thread. Lily lived in the bright, frantic arena of the office, where he was brilliant and exhausted and perpetually in motion. He told himself he was managing both, carefully, responsibly. Now, in one evening, Maya had pulled the circles together, overlapping them with a simple invitation written in warm, precise sentences. The week leading up to the dinner unfolded with cruel speed. At the office, Ethan's nerves manifested as impatience. Small mistakes in reports irritated him more than they should. He snapped in meetings, then apologized with a tight smile. He caught Priya watching him with that analytical gaze of hers, as if she were tracing patterns in his behavior like lines on a chart. "You all right?" she asked once, as they rode the elevator up after a board prep session. "You seem distracted." "Just tired," he said. "Big sprint. You know how it is." Her answer was non-committal, but not unkind. "Get some rest. Fatigue makes people sloppy." The word sloppy echoed in his head long after the doors slid open. He texted Lily twice about the dinner, fingers hovering near the edge of panic. "We can cancel. I'll talk to Maya." She replied. She seemed so genuine in the email. "Won't it look strange if I suddenly can't make it?" He stared at the message. "Yes, it would. It'll be fine. Just keep it professional." He added a smiley face he didn't feel. Underneath, something else whispered, "You did this. You built the lie. Now you're living in it." At home, Maya's performance was so flawless that even someone less self-absorbed than Ethan might have missed the slight, sharpened edges. She hummed as she moved through the loft with lists and timelines. She ordered flowers from a black-owned florist she loved, white lilies and green eucalyptus, arranged in long, low vases for the center of the table. She visited a small wine shop in Inman Park and spoke with the owner at length about pairings. When she talked about the dinner, her tone was light, almost excited. "I spoke to Naomi today," she told him one afternoon, as she arranged fresh linens in the dining room. "She's really looking forward to it. She said it's been too long since we all sat down together." "That's nice," Ethan murmured, adjusting his cufflinks, his mind already halfway in a meeting. "I also confirmed with Priya," Maya continued. "She said she's curious to finally see the famous view you've mentioned." He froze. "You invited Priya too?" "Of course," Maya said, as if the idea were obvious. "She's been with you since the early days. I thought you'd be glad." He fought the urge to swear. Priya, Lily, Jordan, Naomi, Maya, himself. The whole constellation. Each day, Ethan tried again. Small, different angles. "Maybe we should keep it to just colleagues," he suggested at breakfast. "We can have a separate dinner with Jordan and Naomi later." Maya shook her head. "No, they're family, Ethan. They've seen you at your worst and your best. I want them there. Another time. Or maybe we tell everyone we want to celebrate somewhere out. Restaurant, private room. Less work for you." "I want to cook for you," she replied simply, rinsing blueberries at the sink. "You work so hard. Let me do this." Her reasoning was so gentle, so reasonable, that to protest would be to expose something raw, something ugly. And that he could not risk. He began to watch her the way a man watches an ocean he's just realized might be deeper than he thought, searching for rip currents, for tells, for any sign that the surface calm was a lie. But Maya's performance did not crack. She kissed him goodbye in the mornings. She asked about his day in the evenings. She sent a polite group message reminding everyone of the time and the dress code, smart casual, nothing too fussy, and included a cheerful note about dessert. Only once did something flicker that made his skin prickle. They were in bed, lights off, city glow seeping faintly through the curtains. Ethan lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, an ache of dread spreading through his chest. "Maya?" he said softly into the dark. "Yes? Are you happy?" The question escaped before he could reshape it into something safer. There was a long pause. He could hear the whisper of the fan, the distant wail of a siren, the rhythmic thump of his own heart. Then she answered, her voice soft but steady. "I'm learning," she said, "what happiness actually means to me." He turned his head toward her shadowed profile. "What does that mean?" She was quiet for a beat. "It means I'm done mistaking peace for silence, or comfort for love." The words slid between them, delicate and devastating. He felt suddenly, acutely exposed. "Maya, She rolled onto her side, facing away, pulling the sheet up to her shoulder. "Get some sleep, Ethan," she murmured. "You've got a big week ahead." He lay awake long after her breathing evened out, a cold unease coiling in his gut. In another life, another version of himself, he might have followed that conversation, might have asked her what she needed, what she knew, what had shifted in the landscape of her heart. But in this life, he turned away from the discomfort and buried himself in logistics instead. Investors, dashboards, a dinner he could not seem to reroute. As the week unspooled, the day circled closer, inevitable as the return of sunrise. In the loft, flowers arrived, wine chilled, plates were counted and polished. In Ethan's chest, a quiet panic grew louder with every passing hour. And in the center of it all, Maya moved with the composure of a woman who knew exactly where she was leading him and exactly how much light she was about to pour into the shadows he'd tried so hard to keep unseen. By the time Friday evening unfurled itself fully across Atlanta, the loft was dressed for intimacy. The sun had gone down in a blaze of tangerine and violet, leaving the city awash in twilight and neon. Inside, the air held the gentle warmth of roasted garlic and herbs, of good wine breathing, of candles slowly softening the edges of every surface. Maya moved through her home with the serene efficiency of a conductor taking her place before the orchestra. Not a gesture wasted, not a detail unconsidered. The long dining table, usually bare and practical, had been transformed. A simple linen runner, low vases of white lilies and eucalyptus, plates arranged in quiet symmetry, glassware catching the candlelight like captured stars. On the kitchen island, small plates of appetizers waited. Roasted grapes with goat cheese, crostini with caramelized onions, little bowls of marinated olives. Nothing ostentatious, everything intentional. She smoothed her hand over the back of one chair, then glanced toward the window. The city flickered back at her, indifferent and beautiful. Behind her, she heard the bedroom door open. Ethan emerged in a navy shirt that brought out the blue in his eyes, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He looked, Maya noted, exactly like the image of success he had spent years constructing. Composed, polished, enviable. "You look incredible," he said, taking in the deep emerald dress that draped along her figure, the soft coil of her curls pinned partly back, the quiet glow of her skin. "Thank you," she replied. "So do you." The compliment floated between them, light as glass. The first knock came just after 7. Jordan and Naomi Blake stood on the threshold, warm and familiar, carrying a bottle of champagne and the easy intimacy of people who had seen them through both lean years and rich ones. "Birthday boy," Jordan said, pulling Ethan into a strong hug. "45 looks annoyingly good on you." Naomi slipped past them to wrap her arms around Maya. "Look at you," she murmured. "You turned this place into a magazine spread. You okay?" Maya kissed her cheek, smiling. "I'm hosting. You know that's my element. Naomi pulled back just enough to search her face, intuition flickering in her eyes. She saw something there, an extra stillness, a depth that hadn't been there months ago. But Maya's expression was luminous, controlled. Whatever question rose in Naomi's throat, she swallowed it for now. They were just topping off glasses in the living room when the next arrival buzzed up. Priya entered with a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "Happy birthday, Ethan," she said, offering him the gift. "It's not a board presentation, but I hope it passes inspection." "Anything from you terrifies me," he joked, trying to keep his tone light. "It's probably a spreadsheet bound in leather." "It's a fountain pen," she replied dryly. "So you remember how to sign things you might regret." Laughter rippled through the room. Even Ethan managed a genuine smile. Maya watched them all with a quiet satisfaction that was not joy, exactly, but something adjacent, relief perhaps, that the stage was set and the players had taken their marks. She poured champagne, offered canapes, drew people into conversation about safe things, a recent art opening, a disastrous investor who wore too much cologne, the absurdity of Atlanta traffic. For a little while, it almost felt like any other dinner. Almost. At precisely 7:18, the intercom crackled softly. Another guest. Ethan's glass paused midway to his lips. His hand did not quite tremble, but the stillness that gripped him was too sharp, too sudden. "I'll get it," Maya said lightly, setting her own drink down. She crossed the room, the swish of her dress the only sound she seemed to make, and pressed the button to unlock the downstairs door. A minute later, a hesitant knock sounded. When Maya opened the door, Lily stood there, framed by the soft hallway light. She looked younger than Maya expected, and older than any 29-year-old should have to feel. Her black dress was simple, but carefully chosen. Her hair smoothed back, her eyes wide and bright with nerves. One hand clutched a bottle of wine as if it were a passport. "Lily," Maya said, her smile warm, inviting. "I'm so glad you could come." "Thank you for having me," Lily replied, voice just a touch breathless. "Happy birthday to Ethan. I, brought a Pinot Noir. I wasn't sure what you were making." "This is perfect," Maya said, taking the bottle. "Please, come in." As Lily stepped over the threshold, her eyes flickered around the loft, taking in the art, the plants, the way the light caught the edges of the furniture. Then her gaze landed on the living room, on Ethan. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed to a single line of sight between them. He stood frozen by the window, flanked by Jordan and Priya, the city's glow framing his silhouette. As Lily's eyes met his, something raw flashed across her face. A flicker of recognition, fear, and something heartbreakingly tender. The expression on Ethan's face was harder to name. It was as though all the carefully constructed compartments inside him had suddenly merged. Guilt, panic, a strange, almost childlike wish to disappear. If anyone else in the room noticed, they were polite enough, or shocked enough, to pretend they didn't. "Everyone," Maya called, her tone smooth and bright. "This is Lily Park, the brilliant UX mind Ethan's been talking about for months." She guided Lily into the circle, laying a gentle hand at the small of her back. "Lily, this is my husband Ethan, which you obviously know, Jordan and Naomi, our dear friends, and Priya, his right hand at the company." Lily shook hands all around, her smile tight at the edges, but sincere. "It's really nice to meet you all," she said, glancing at Maya with a kind of bewildered gratitude. "Thank you for including me." "Any friend of the company is a friend of ours," Jordan said, easy and charming. "Ethan's been singing your praises. Finally nice to see you're real and not some AI he invented to justify all the late nights." Lily laughed, a small, startled sound that broke some of the tension. "Come," Maya said, "let's move to the table before the food stages a protest." The dining room glowed under the pendant lights, every place setting a quiet promise. Name cards, handwritten in her looping script, marked each seat. Ethan noticed with an inward lurch that Lily's card was directly opposite his. Maya took her place at one end of the table, Ethan at the other. Naomi sat beside Maya, Jordan beside Naomi, Priya on Ethan's right, Lily on his left? No, Lily sat directly across from him, caught in a line of vision she could not escape. If anyone questioned the arrangement, they didn't voice it. As the first course was served, chilled cucumber soup with a drizzle of herb oil, the conversation wove itself into something almost normal. Work, travel, small stories of recent mishaps. Naomi told a story about a design client who wanted Afro-futurist minimalism with a rustic farmhouse vibe, and everyone laughed. Maya watched Lily answer polite questions. Where she'd moved from, what drew her to UX, why she joined the company. Her hands cradled the spoon carefully, sleeves sliding back to reveal the faint tremor in her wrist. "And how has it been working with Ethan?" Naomi asked, smiling. "We've known him since the who needs sleep days." "It's intense," Lily replied, picking her words with care, "but inspiring. He's very driven." Across the table, Ethan took a sip of wine that did nothing to steady him. Maya's expression remained thoughtful, open. "He's always had a talent for intensity," she said lightly. "I used to joke that he'd start optimizing his sleep cycles if I let him." "You did joke about that," Jordan added, chuckling. "Back when he was pulling all-nighters fueled by bad coffee and idealism. And you kept us from crashing into a wall," Ethan said, grateful for the distraction. "We'd have set the office on fire without your reality checks." "Don't be dramatic," Maya replied, eyes meeting his across the candles. "You'd have found a way to char the edges at least." There was laughter again, warmth rippling for a moment across the surface. But beneath the easy banter, the tension was a constant undertow. Every time Ethan glanced up, he found Lily's gaze skittering away. Every time Lily lifted her eyes from her plate, she collided with someone who knew Ethan in a different context. Maya, serene and radiant. Jordan, watching more closely than he pretended. Priya, taking in everything with quiet calculation. Maya steered the conversation with subtle precision, drawing stories out of each person, making sure no one disappeared into silence. "Lily," she said as the main course was served, "roasted tenderloin with garlicky potatoes and charred broccolini. Ethan mentioned you relocated for the job. That's bold. How did you decide to take the leap?" Lily hesitated, then answered. "I wanted to work somewhere I felt like my ideas mattered. And Atlanta felt like a place where things were happening. New stories being written." "New stories are important," Maya said softly, "especially when the old ones have been told from the same angle for too long." For the briefest instant, their eyes met with a flicker of understanding that had nothing to do with Ethan or the company. Woman to woman, a recognition of all the compromises required simply to stand in the rooms they occupied. As the evening slipped forward, the air in the dining room grew denser. The candles burned lower, their flames steady, their light more concentrated. The wine loosened tongues just enough to blur the edges of restraint. Jordan leaned back, watching Ethan over the rim of his glass. "You remember Austin?" he asked suddenly. "The first big health tech conference. When you pitched like your whole soul was on that stage?" Ethan's grip tightened on his fork. "Yeah," he said. "Hard to forget." "That was around March last year, wasn't it?" Maya asked, her tone mild. "Right when things started shifting for the company?" He cleared his throat. "That's when a lot changed, yeah." "Isn't that when you joined?" Maya turned to Lily, brows raised in polite curiosity. "After that conference?" Lily swallowed. "Yes, I met some of the team there. It felt like the right fit." The room seemed to exhale and hold its breath all at once. Jordan's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. Priya's gaze flicked from Ethan to Lily to Maya, taking in the constellation of reactions. Naomi's hand slid under the table to rest on Maya's knee, a silent question and a wordless offering of solidarity. Maya smiled and sliced into her tenderloin, as though nothing at all was extraordinary about the moment. "So much can start in March," she said. "A season shift, a new job, a conference, a revelation." The word hung in the air, weighty and glimmering. Ethan set his knife down and reached for his glass again. His hands shook just enough to make the wine ripple. He could feel the walls of his carefully constructed double life inching closer, the space between lies narrowing with each passing second. The plates would soon be cleared. Dessert would soon arrive. And then there would be a toast. The night, like a train hurtling down a dark track, was approaching the point where derailment was no longer hypothetical. It was inevitable. By the time the plates from the main course had been cleared, the air in the dining room felt almost electric. The candles had burned lower, their flames smaller but more intense, casting shadows that clung to cheekbones and jawlines, softening edges even as the tension sharpened. Maya could feel it, in the way Lily's laugh came a beat too late, in the way Ethan's fingers tapped almost imperceptibly against the stem of his glass, in the glances Jordan and Priya traded when they thought no one was looking. Naomi's hand still rested lightly on Maya's knee beneath the table, a quiet anchor, a question. Is this the moment? Yes, it was. The dessert plates arrived, dark chocolate tarts with a sheen like polished lacquer, garnished with slivers of candied orange. Coffee was poured. Another bottle of wine was opened, its cork exhaling with a sound that felt like a sigh. Maya waited until everyone had taken at least one bite, until conversation had climbed briefly back into safer territory. Someone mentioning a TV show, someone else laughing about an investor who thought user experience meant making the app blue. Then she rose to her feet. The movement was unhurried, elegant. Her chair slid back without a scrape. The room shifted its attention toward her almost automatically, like sunflowers turning toward the light. Ethan glanced up, startled. "Maya?" he asked, half smiling. "You don't have to." She lifted her glass, the gesture as natural as breathing. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. He fell silent. "Of course," Jordan murmured, settling back in his chair. Priya's gaze sharpened. Naomi withdrew her hand from Maya's knee and folded it around her glass, as if bracing herself. Maya let her eyes travel around the table, landing finally on Ethan. "Tonight," she began, her voice soft but clear, "we're here to celebrate you, Ethan. 45 years around the sun. 15 of those I've been privileged to witness up close." A ripple of warmth passed over his face. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. The hope that this might be nothing more than what it appeared. "You are," she continued, "a man who builds. A man who believes in possibility, who turns ideas into products, products into companies, companies into stories people want to tell at dinner parties." A few smiles, a chuckle from Jordan. Ethan relaxed by a fraction. "I've watched you pitch on stages all over the country," she said. "Watched you stand in front of strangers and convince them to invest not just money, but faith in what you're trying to create. I've seen how hard you work, how long the hours are, how much of yourself you pour into the future you imagine." She paused, taking a slow breath. The candles flickered as if leaning in. "I remember the younger version of you," she added, a faint, wistful smile touching her lips. "The one in Chicago who stood in the back of a museum and asked a room full of art people whether technology could tell a better story or just a shinier lie. That man fascinated me. He still does sometimes." Ethan's throat bobbed. Something uneasy flickered in his eyes. Maya raised her glass a fraction higher. "So tonight, I want to honor all of that. Your drive, your restlessness, your ability to turn pressure into momentum. You are, without question, a man who can move mountains when he chooses." Silence settled like a curtain. "And," she said quietly, "you are also a man who believes I am too distracted, too organized, too comfortable to notice when you are sleeping with someone else." The words landed with a precise, devastating softness. No raised voice, no theatrics, just truth, placed gently in the center of the table like another dish for everyone to consider. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Lily's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against her plate, the sound shockingly loud in the quiet. Her face drained of color, then flooded red, tears springing to her eyes before she could stop them. Ethan stared at Maya, mouth slightly open, all color draining from his own face. "Maya," he began, barely above a whisper. "What are you?" She held up a hand, palm delicate but commanding. "Let me finish," she said, the same words he'd used on countless conference calls, now returned to him with surgical precision. Naomi's eyes shone, her jaw clenched. Jordan's expression shuddered into something unreadable. Priya's gaze dropped for a moment, absorbing the numbers behind the narrative, the angles, the implications. Maya turned her attention to the younger woman trembling across from her. Lily flinched, tears spilling over now. I didn't." "You made a terrible choice," Maya continued, her tone steady, almost gentle. "You slept with a married man. That's on you. But he is the one who made vows to me. He is the one with power at your workplace. He is the one who promised to protect what we built. I will not let him hide behind you." She shifted her gaze back to Ethan. "I've known for 3 weeks," she said. "Since the morning you left your tablet on the kitchen counter in your rush to make a meeting. I didn't go looking, Ethan. It was just there. Your messages with her. The photos. The travel dates that matched your conferences. The way you described me as comfortable." The word cut through the air like broken glass. "You were never meant to see that," Ethan said hoarsely, reaching for anything that resembled control. Maya's lips curved faintly. "No," she agreed. "I was meant to live beside it. Quietly, graciously, blindly." She reached for the sideboard then, the one piece of furniture in the room that was entirely hers, filled with art books and old exhibition catalogs. From its lower shelf, she took out a slim manila folder and laid it on the table in front of her, fingers resting lightly on the cardboard as if it were just another menu. "In the last 3 weeks," she said, "I have hired a private investigator. I have spoken with an attorney. I have reviewed expense reports, travel logs, and a truly astonishing number of screenshots." Her eyes glinted, not with madness, but with clarity. "Alma found hotel charges in Austin, in Denver, in New Orleans, filed under product summits and market research. She traced the receipts. I saw the room bookings, the dates, the photos. She also found internal chats you didn't think to delete." Ethan swallowed. "You had me followed?" he demanded, shock shading into anger. Maya, she slid the folder down the length of the table. It stopped in front of him with a gentle thud. "These are copies," she said. "The originals are with my lawyer." Jordan exhaled slowly, his eyes closing for a heartbeat. Priya's jaw flexed as she glanced at the folder, then at Ethan, then at Lily. Naomi stared at Maya as if seeing her anew, something like awe mingling with sorrow. Lily covered her mouth with trembling fingers, tears running unchecked down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant—" "I believe that," Maya said, "but intent does not erase harm. It doesn't absolve you. It just contextualizes you." She drew in a measured breath. "So, here is what happens now." Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Every person at the table leaned in, as if pulled by gravity. "On Monday, my attorney will file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial misconduct," she said. "I will be requesting a fair share of the company I helped you stabilize with my inheritance and my connections. I will not be leaving this marriage empty-handed. I built too much of it for that." Ethan shook his head, the beginnings of protest stumbling out. "Maya, you can't just—" "I can," she replied, her tone almost tender, as though reassuring a frightened child. "And I am." Her gaze— "You have told yourself a story, Ethan," she said, "that you are a good man who made a mistake, that you are a visionary under too much pressure, that I am comfortable and you are the one who is restless, that I wouldn't notice because I didn't want to see." She shook her head. "But I do see you. I see all of you. The parts that are brilliant, the parts that are kind, the parts that are cowardly and cruel. I have held all of it for years, and now I am setting it down." The room felt suspended, breathless. She turned to Lily again, her expression softer now. "You should go," she said quietly. "You don't deserve to sit through the rest of this. Whatever you thought he promised you, it wasn't real. Men like Ethan rarely leave their wives. They just want to believe they could." Lily pushed back her chair with a scrape that felt like a wound. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice barely more than air. "For all of it." "I know," Maya replied. Lily left the table on shaking legs. A moment later, the front door opened and closed, the sound sharp as a period at the end of a sentence. For a while, no one spoke. Then Jordan leaned back, folding his arms over his chest. "Damn," he murmured, half to himself. "We all knew you were slipping, Ethan. But this? It's not what it looks like," Ethan snapped, finally finding the heat he'd been reaching for. "She's making this sound strategic," Priya cut in, one eyebrow lifting. "Because that's the word I'd use." Naomi reached across the table to grasp Maya's hand. "You're not alone," she said softly. "Not for the group, but for the woman at the center of the storm." Maya finally sat, her body suddenly aware of its own exhaustion. But her spine remained straight, her hands steady in Naomi's grasp. "This isn't rage," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "That came before. This is release." She looked at Ethan one last time, truly looked at him, not as the man she'd married, not as the father of dreams they'd never had, but as he was now, in this moment, stripped of all the stories he'd wrapped around himself. "You don't get to define me anymore," she said. "You don't get to decide how much space I'm allowed to take up in my own life." The candles fluttered as if a breeze had passed through, though the air was still. Somewhere far below, in the streets of Atlanta, traffic moved, lives intersected, strangers laughed, lovers argued. The world went on. But in that loft, something invisible shifted, a contract unspoken and centuries old, where women swallowed betrayal to keep the peace. Maya had chosen not to renew it. In the hush that followed, she felt a strange, profound stillness rise within her. Not emptiness, but room. Space where something new could someday grow. Publicly, she had undone her marriage. Privately, quietly, she had stepped back into herself. For a long moment after Maya's last words, the loft felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. The candles flickered. The city beyond the windows pulsed and glittered, oblivious. At the table, no one moved. It was as if the room itself waited to see what shape this new reality would take. Then Ethan pushed his chair back. The scrape of wood against floor was harsh, jarring. He stood too quickly, knocking his knee against the underside of the table, making the cutlery tremble. "Maya, this is insane," he said, his voice rough, breaking through the silence like glass through still water. "You ambush me in my own home? In front of my friends? My team?" Maya looked up at him, her hands still folded around the stem of her glass. "Your home," she repeated quietly, the ghost of a smile touching her mouth. "How quickly we forget pronouns when we're cornered." He flinched. "You could have talked to me, privately. We could have worked this out." "Could we?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Between the hotel rooms and the lies and the way you described me to her? What part of that was asking to work it out?" His jaw clenched. "You're making this bigger than it is." Naomi let out a soft, disbelieving sound. Jordan's head snapped toward Ethan, eyes narrowing. "Bigger than it is?" Jordan repeated slowly. "My guy." Priya didn't speak, but the look she gave Ethan was more cutting than any words. "You're humiliating yourself," Ethan went on, frustration spilling into anger now. "Do you know how this looks? You think a judge is going to—" "A judge," Maya interrupted, "will look at the evidence. My lawyer seems quite confident about that part." Ethan's gaze dropped to the folder in front of him, its edges glinting in the candlelight like the outline of a door he did not want to walk through. "This is our marriage," he said, quieter now, but no less intense. "You don't just decide unilaterally to blow it up because I—" "Because you what?" Maya asked, and for the first time that night, her voice iced over. "Because you got bored? Because you wanted applause in two arenas at once? Because you told yourself I'd never notice you fragmenting our life like a side project? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Words scattered at his feet like broken glass. This isn't you, he tried. You're not cruel. You're not vindictive. Something's gotten into your head. What you put in my head, she corrected, were images of you in hotel rooms with someone else. And the realization that I had built a life around a man who thought I was too dull to see it. His shoulders sagged for a fraction of a second, shame cracking through his indignation. I made a mistake, he said hoarse. I'm human, Maya. I was under pressure. I got lost. You know me. I did, she replied, once. Her voice softened, not with forgiveness, but with a quiet finality that was somehow more painful. But the man I married, she went on, would have come to me when he was drowning. He would have admitted he was scared. He would have trusted me enough to say, I'm not okay. I'm failing. I don't know how to carry all of this. That man has been gone for a long time. Maybe he never existed outside my hope for him. Ethan swallowed, his eyes glistening. We can fix this, he whispered. Please, don't do this. Not like this. Maya exhaled slowly. I am fixing this, she said. Just not in the way you want. She pushed her chair back and rose, every movement unhurried, as if she were leaving a meeting she'd already stayed at too long. Her legs felt oddly light, as though her body hadn't quite caught up with the weight she just set down. Maya, Ethan said again, the syllable breaking. Please, sit down. We can talk. No, she replied, gentle but firm. We've talked enough in rooms where I left smaller than I entered. She turned to Naomi. Would you mind driving me? She asked. I don't think I should be alone tonight. Naomi nodded at once, eyes shining. Of course. She stood too, her chair scraping softly, and touched Maya's arm with a tenderness that made something ache deep in Maya's chest. Where are you going? Ethan demanded, as if the answer might still be negotiable. To my place, Maya said. He frowned. This is your… No, she cut in. This is our loft, for now. But I've already signed a lease in Midtown. I moved most of my things this week. The essentials, at least. I didn't think you'd notice. The irony in that last sentence rippled through the room. Jordan let out a low whistle. You really thought this through, he murmured, not without admiration. Priya, still seated, regarded Maya with a steady, almost reverent gaze. You shouldn't have had to, she said simply. Ethan looked from one face to another, betrayal layering over shock. You all knew? He asked, incredulous. You're just… what? Taking her side? This isn't a game, Ethan, Priya replied. There are no sides. There are actions and consequences. You're experiencing the latter. Jordan rose then, slowly, bracing his hands on the table as he stood. I've tried to talk to you for months, he said, his voice low, about how you've been running yourself and everyone else into the ground. You didn't want to hear it. Now you don't get to act surprised that something broke. Ethan stared at him as if he were suddenly a stranger. You're my co-founder. I am, Jordan said, and I've watched you treat the person who held your life together like she was a backdrop. That's not leadership, man. That's cowardice. The word hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Maya reached for her clutch on the sideboard, slipping her phone inside with a small, decisive motion. She felt oddly outside her own body, watching herself move through a scene she had imagined 100 ways and executed exactly once. She turned back to Ethan, taking in his flushed cheeks, his rigid shoulders, the way his hands still rested on the unopened folder, like a man afraid to confirm what he already knew. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I did love you, deeply. I believed in you more than you believed in yourself sometimes. I wanted us to win. You were not an afterthought in my life. You were the center. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Then how can you walk away so easily? Easily, she echoed, and there was a tired, incredulous softness to the word. Nothing about this is easy. I'm walking away because staying would cost me parts of myself I refuse to lose. She paused, letting the truth settle between them. Begging, she added, was never going to be one of them. For a moment, she thought he might cross the room, might fall to his knees like a character in a story who'd finally understood the enormity of what he was losing. He didn't. Of course he didn't. He stood there, rooted, held in place by pride and fear, and all the narratives he'd constructed about himself. Maya turned toward the door. "I'll be in touch through Caroline," she said over her shoulder. "Don't contact me until she's reached out. It won't help either of us." Naomi squeezed her hand. "I'll get the car." She moved ahead, leaving Maya a moment alone with the threshold. The hardwood beneath her feet felt different now, no longer hers to maintain, to polish, to carry. Just wood, just floors. Before she stepped out, a voice behind her spoke, quieter than the rest. "Maya." She glanced back. It was Priya, still seated, still composed. "If you need a witness," Priya said, "for what was built here and who helped build it, I'm available. For lawyers, for the board, for whoever needs to know." Gratitude stung behind Maya's eyes, fierce and sudden. "Thank you," she murmured. "I might take you up on that." "And Maya," Jordan added from his place at the table, "if you ever decide to build something new, and you want a partner who knows how not to burn the foundation down, call me." She managed a small, surprised smile. Not now, not yet, but the offer lodged somewhere inside her, a tiny seed of future possibility. Then she stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her, the soft, final sound of a chapter closing. The air outside the loft was cooler, quieter. The building's hallway smelled faintly of cleaning products and someone else's perfume. She passed framed photographs she'd never really looked at, abstract prints in muted tones, and felt a strange lightness in her limbs. In the elevator, descending floor by floor, her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls. Emerald dress, bare shoulders, eyes too bright. A woman who had just detonated her life with a handful of sentences and a file folder. She expected to feel empty. She did not. What she felt was something harder to name. A trembling, exhausted relief. A grief that hadn't fully taken shape yet. And beneath it all, a thin, steady thread of something dangerously like hope. Outside, the night had deepened. The city hummed, alive and indifferent. Naomi's car idled at the curb, hazard lights blinking softly. When Maya slid into the passenger seat, Naomi reached over and wrapped both arms around her, pulling her into a hug that smelled of jasmine and tears she hadn't yet shed. "You did it," Naomi whispered against her hair. "God, you really did it." Maya let her forehead rest against her friend's shoulder, exhaling a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. "I did," she said, voice raw, "and I have no idea what comes next." Naomi pulled back, wiping at her own eyes. "Then we'll figure it out," she replied. "One step at a time. But you're not going back there, Maya. Not in your body and not in your mind." Maya looked out at the city, at the blur of lights in the distant, shimmering promise of tomorrow. "No," she agreed softly. "I'm not." As Naomi pulled away from the curb and the building receded in the rearview mirror, Maya watched the windows of the loft, a handful of glowing rectangles stacked against the night, until they disappeared entirely. She did not beg for another chance. She did not bargain with a man who had treated her heart as collateral. She left, and somewhere deep inside her, beneath the ache and the exhaustion and the shock, a new, unnamed self shifted, stretched, and began, very quietly, to rise. Divorce, Maya discovered, was not a single event, but a long, exacting choreography of signatures and silences, of documents sliding across polished tables, and truths being translated into language the law could hold. If the birthday dinner had been the explosion, the weeks that followed were the slow-motion fall of debris. She moved into her midtown apartment 2 days after leaving the loft. A clean, sunlit space with high ceilings and bare walls that echoed when she laughed for the first time alone. Cardboard boxes became temporary furniture. Her grandmother's quilt took its place on a new bed that Ethan had never touched. a small, defiant sanctuary stitched from another woman's resilience. In those early mornings, the city's light slipped in through uncurtained windows, pale and tender. Maya sat at a makeshift desk, just a table and a chair, and read through emails from Caroline Ng. Caroline was not dramatic. She did not traffic in outrage. She made strategy feel like art. Attached, you'll find the preliminary petition for dissolution. Adultery, financial misconduct, and marital waste. Please review for accuracy. I've outlined your contributions, both financial and intangible, to Cole Health Systems. We'll need corroborating statements. Maya read each word carefully, feeling pieces of her life reduced to sections, subsections, bullet points. It was both cold and oddly liberating. The story she had lived, messy, emotional, tangled with love, was being distilled into a case, something she could carry into court without breaking. Alma's reports arrived in parallel, a steady drip of facts, dates, and images. March, Austin hotel receipts under company card. Room service for 2, single room. April, Denver, double occupancy, 1 room. Internal calendar marked as conference prep. There were photographs. Ethan and Lily leaving a hotel lobby, shoulders angled ever so slightly toward one another. The kind of distance that pretended it was platonic, but couldn't quite hide the intimacy in their silhouettes. Maya clicked through them with a steady gaze. It hurt, but not in the way it had that first night in the kitchen. This pain was cleaner, tempered by resolve. Evidence, proof, foundation. Ethan, predictably, did not go quietly. He hired a lawyer whose reputation rested on 2 things: aggression and charm. A man who called Caroline Ms. Ng with just enough emphasis to signal condescension, and asked questions designed to paint Maya as unstable, dramatic, overreacting. In their first joint meeting, held in a conference room with too much glass and too little air, he tried to set the tone. "Let's be reasonable," he said, folding his manicured hands on the table. "We're all grown-ups here. No one wants a public spectacle." Maya sat across from him, flanked by Caroline and Alma, her back straight, her expression composed. She wore a simple black dress and a pair of small gold hoop earrings that had belonged to her mother. The jewelry felt like armor. Caroline's smile did not reach her eyes. "We agree," she replied. "Our goal is not spectacle. It's equity. Maya is entitled to her share of what she helped build." Ethan shifted in his chair. "You didn't build the company," he said, looking at Maya. "You supported me. That's not the same thing." Maya's fingers tightened around her pen. She met his gaze calmly. "Do you remember the Midtown Innovation Fund dinner?" she asked. "The one where you landed your first serious Atlanta investors?" He blinked. "Of course. Who chose the gallery that hosted it?" she continued. "Who convinced the director to waive the fee? Who curated the art so the space told a story that matched your pitch?" His jaw clenched. "You helped. I appreciate that." Caroline slid a document across the table. "Affidavits from the gallery director and 2 investors," she said. They described Maya as the architect of the event. Several mentioned that they invested because they trusted her judgment. The opposing lawyer skimmed the pages, his expression tightening. "And this," Caroline added, placing another document on the table, "is the bank record showing Maya's inheritance covering payroll during the period your Series A funds were delayed. We've matched the dates with your internal financials. Without that money, the company would have been insolvent within 60 days. Silence hummed between them. Ethan stared at the numbers as if they were written in a language he didn't remember learning. "I always meant to pay it back," he said quietly. "You didn't," Maya replied, "but the court will consider it now." There were more meetings, more documents, more attempts from Ethan's side to minimize her contributions, to suggest she was angry and trying to punish him. Each attempt met with another piece of evidence, another quiet testimony from someone he had forgotten saw her clearly. Priya submitted a meticulous statement outlining the early financial crises, the nights Maya had brought food to exhausted staff, the time she'd connected them with a nonprofit that later became one of their most influential clients. Jordan, after several long, painful conversations with himself, offered his own. Maya was not a passive participant. She was a co-creator of our narrative, a bridge into spaces we had no access to, and a stabilizing force in our early years. Removing her from the story is not only inaccurate, it is dishonest. When Caroline read that last line aloud, Maya had to look away, blinking quickly. "Are you all right?" Caroline asked, not unkindly. "I'm fine," Maya said, though her throat felt tight. "It's just strange, hearing it acknowledged, out loud." "You deserve to hear it," Caroline replied, "a long time ago." Outside the arena of their dissolving marriage, the company itself shuddered. It began with whispers. Employees noticing that Lily was suddenly gone, her departure explained only as a mutual decision after an internal HR investigation. The story did not hold. Tech workers could read between lines as well as code. Slack channels hummed with speculation. The mood in the office shifted. Then came the board. They'd been informed of the divorce proceedings as a matter of course. They'd received copies, sanitized but pointed, of the allegations regarding misuse of company funds. They requested a meeting. In that boardroom, under cold, bright lights, Ethan tried to draw on the same charisma that had once made these people lean forward eagerly when he spoke. "I made personal mistakes," he admitted, because denying it now would only make him look foolish. "I let things blur in a way that I shouldn't have, but the company is sound." "The company is exposed," one board member corrected. "Legally, reputationally, you used corporate funds during an affair with an employee under your supervision. That is not just a personal mistake. That is a liability." Ethan's mouth tightened. "We can manage the narrative. We'll issue a statement." "We will manage the narrative," Priya interjected, voice even but iron underneath. "As a group, not as your cleanup crew." He looked at her, stung. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the company's side," she said, "which is more than you can say for yourself right now." In the weeks that followed, 2 senior engineers resigned quietly and joined a competitor. A hospital network that had been close to signing a lucrative contract postponed their decision indefinitely. A journalist who covered tech and ethics reached out with questions that were too specific to ignore. Ethan found his days carved into uncomfortable compartments. Meetings with lawyers, calls with nervous investors, fraught conversations with HR and PR consultants. The work that had once thrilled him now felt like a minefield. Each step an opportunity to detonate something else he'd failed to safeguard. Meanwhile, in her midtown apartment, Maya watched it unfold from a distance that was both painful and necessary. She did not gloat. That would have required an energy she no longer wished to waste on him. Instead, she focused on signing the documents Caroline sent her, on attending hearings where judges in black robes sifted her marriage into legal categories, on visiting her therapist and letting herself cry for losses that had nothing to do with equity or shares. At one particularly tense settlement conference, Ethan's lawyer made a last-ditch attempt at minimizing her claim. "She's asking for an outsized percentage," he argued. "She didn't work there. She had no formal title." Caroline didn't even look up from her notes. "And yet," she said, "nearly every early investor mentions her in their due diligence reports. As a reason they trusted him. As a reason they believed his vision. Men build companies, but women like Maya make them credible. It's time that counted." In the end, after months of negotiation and thinly veiled hostility, they reached an agreement. Maya would receive a significant equity stake in Cole Health Systems, less than Caroline had initially aimed for, more than Ethan had ever expected to concede. She would keep her midtown apartment outright. There would be a cash settlement substantial enough to give her breathing room to start again. And Ethan would step down as CEO. The board framed it as a mutual decision for the sake of the company's future, a graceful spin on a fall from power. He would remain in an advisory role, they said. He would focus on product vision, on innovation, on the parts of the work he had always been best at, while someone else took the helm. When Caroline relayed the final terms to Maya, they sat together in the quiet of her apartment, the late afternoon sun casting rectangles of light on the bare walls. "It's done," Caroline said, sliding the last set of papers across the table. "Sign here." Maya held the pen for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she signed her name. Once, twice, 3 times, each stroke a tiny cutting of a thread. When it was over, she set the pen down and leaned back in her chair. "How do you feel?" Caroline asked. Maya considered the question. She scanned her body for answers, the looseness in her shoulders, the heaviness in her chest, the strange, unfamiliar quiet in her mind. "Untethered," she said at last, "like I've stepped off a ship I helped build, and I'm watching it sail without me, and also watching it list because of the holes he drilled in it when no one was looking." Caroline's mouth quirked. "That's a very poetic way to describe a settlement." "I curated exhibitions," Maya replied with a faint smile. "My metaphors are all architectural or nautical." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. "You did well," Caroline said finally. "You protected yourself. You claimed what was yours." Maya nodded, a new awareness beginning to unfurl inside her. For the first time in a long time, her future was no longer an addendum to someone else's plan. It was blank, terrifying, and hers. "I think," she murmured, looking out at the city glowing in the distance, "it's time I build something with my own name on the door." In the weeks following the settlement, Maya entered a season of life that felt both unfamiliar and quietly luminous, like stepping out from the wings of a stage into her own spotlight, unsure of the choreography, but certain the moment belonged to her. Her midtown apartment evolved slowly, transformed from a temporary refuge into something warm and intentional. She hung her favorite artworks on the walls, pieces she'd once curated, now reclaiming them as parts of her own story. She bought a low velvet sofa the color of mulled wine, a rug woven in bold indigo and rust. Little by little, the space began to resemble a life rebuilt not from scraps, but from choice. She woke early most mornings, the light spilling over her bare floors like an invitation. Coffee became a quiet ritual, freshly ground beans, a slow pour, the steam rising in soft curls that carried her into the day. For the first time in years, her mornings belonged entirely to her, and she filled them with work. Her work, Jefferson's studio, the consultancy she dreamed of during so many evenings spent smiling at Ethan's colleagues across dinner tables, was no longer a hypothetical. It was a fledgling company taking shape under her hands. She found a shared workspace near Ponce City Market, a sunlit room with exposed brick and wide tables, humming with other creatives building things from scratch. She started with 1 client, then 3, then 7. Artists, nonprofits, cultural institutions looking to connect more deeply with the communities they claim to serve. They came to her with scattered visions, half-built ideas, and questions about how to bridge meaning with impact. Maya listened. She researched. She strategized. She built narratives that honored truth. She crafted brand frameworks that felt like living, breathing stories. She hosted workshops that left people scribbling furiously, eyes bright with recognition. For the first time in a long time, her days felt aligned with purpose rather than proximity to someone else's ambition. But rebuilding was not only about work. Therapy became another anchor, something she approached cautiously, almost shyly, like a conversation with a version of herself she wasn't sure she was ready to meet. Her therapist, Dr. Elena Ortiz, welcomed her with warm eyes in a room filled with plants in soft textures. Maya sat opposite her on a moss-colored sofa during their first session, legs crossed, fingers loosely interlaced in her lap. "You're here," Dr. Ortiz said gently. "That's the hardest part." Maya exhaled. "I'm not sure where to start." "That's all right," Dr. Ortiz replied. "Tell me what brought you." Maya paused, then said quietly, "I think I disappeared and didn't notice until it was too late." The admission hung in the air, vulnerable, true, heavier than she expected. Therapy was not a linear path. Some days she left feeling lighter, almost buoyant. Other days she walked out hollowed, raw, stripped of the armor she'd spent years layering over her emotions. They talked about the marriage, about the gradual erosion of boundaries, about the way Ethan's ambitions had demanded her steady, uncomplaining support, about the subtle conditioning she'd absorbed from a world that praised Black women for being resilient long before it ever asked if they were tired. They talked about her own complicity, the moments she silenced herself for harmony, the dreams she tucked away for convenience, the compromises she'd made because she'd been raised to believe love required endurance. Most challenging of all, they talked about the part of her that still flinched when she imagined Ethan alone in the loft, drowning in the consequences of his own actions. That part of you, Dr. Ortiz said gently, is tender, compassionate. It cared deeply. It can still hold empathy without inviting harm back in. Maya swallowed hard. I don't want to be bitter. You're not, Dr. Ortiz replied. You're grieving. And grief is not bitterness. It is the body learning a new truth. Outside therapy, Maya leaned into small joys she'd once postponed. She visited galleries on quiet weekday afternoons, letting herself get lost in brushstrokes and installations that opened parts of her she hadn't felt in years. She joined a cycling group that met on Saturday mornings, pedaling through the Beltline with a sense of freedom that left her laughing into the wind. She reconnected with old friends, artists, curators, thinkers, people who once knew her as more than someone's partner. She even joined a book club, hosted by a queer couple in Old Fourth Ward, where conversations roam through fiction, politics, and the private dreams people don't always share out loud. There she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, community chosen, not inherited through marriage. At night, in the soft hum of her apartment, she journaled, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. She wrote about the woman she had been, the woman she was becoming, the parts she wanted to carry forward, and the parts she was learning to set down gently, like stones she no longer needed to bear. Some entries were neat, almost academic. Others were messy spirals of longing and fury and forgiveness. All of them were hers. Her relationship with Ethan narrowed to emails relayed through lawyers, short messages about paperwork or logistics. There were no apologies, only rationalizations, explanations, attempts to control the narrative. But Maya didn't need his words anymore. She had learned to write her own. On a warm spring evening, 2 months after finalizing the settlement, she stood on the balcony of her apartment, holding a glass of red wine. The city stretched beneath her, streetlights glowing like constellations, cars humming along invisible lines of rhythm. A soft breeze tugged at her curls. Naomi joined her, leaning against the balcony rail. They clinked glasses. You look different, Naomi said, studying her. How so? Like you're inhabiting yourself again, she said with a grin. Full occupancy. Maya laughed, feeling the truth of it resonate deep in her chest. It wasn't that she was healed. Healing wasn't a finish line. It was a landscape, one she navigated with new steadiness, new vocabulary, new boundaries. She was to be her own center. Later that night, as she curled into bed, she noticed the quilt across her legs, the one her grandmother had made decades earlier. The stitches were uneven in places, but strong, resilient, beautiful because of its imperfections, not in spite of them. Maya, I'm still here, she whispered to the quiet room. More than I've been in years. Rebuilding did not require erasing the past. It required honoring it, and then daring to build something new upon its lessons. And the email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, folded quietly between invoices and newsletters, and a note from Denise reminding her to drink water and not skip lunch. Maya was at the long communal table in her shared workspace, laptop open, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling beside her. Outside the wide windows, Atlanta shimmered under a soft spring haze. Inside, the low buzz of other people's work blended into a kind of white noise that made it easier to hear her own thoughts. She clicked through her inbox, scanning subject lines. Jefferson studio proposal, approved. Invoice confirmation, family Zoom this Sunday? And then, from Lily Park, subject, coffee? If you're willing. Her hands stilled on the trackpad. For a few seconds, the world seemed to pull slightly out of focus, as if someone had turned the dimmer down on everything but that one line of text. She hesitated, breath caught halfway in her chest. She hadn't seen Lily since that night, the scrape of her chair, the shimmer of tears on her cheeks, the way she'd walked out of the loft like a person escaping a burning building she had helped ignite. In the weeks and months afterward, Maya had occasionally wondered about her, the way one wonders about someone involved in a shared catastrophe. Where did she land? Who caught her? Did she learn? Did she heal? But she had never reached out. The wound had been too fresh then. The distance felt necessary. Now, though, curiosity threaded itself through caution. She clicked the email open. Hi, Maya. I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. I've started this email a dozen times and deleted it every time, but I keep coming back to the feeling that I owe you something more than silence. I wanted to say that I'm sorry for my part in what happened, for the pain I helped cause. I know an apology doesn't undo anything, but I need to offer it anyway. If you're willing, I'd like to buy you a coffee. No pressure at all. I completely understand if you'd rather not. Either way, I hope you're doing well. Lily. Maya read it twice. A third time, more slowly. She set her hands in her lap, palms flat against her thighs, and stared out the window for a moment, letting her feelings arrange themselves. There was no anger rising now, not in the sharp, white-hot way it once had. What she felt instead was a strange mix of empathy and wary distance, like recognizing someone on the far shore of a river they both almost drowned in. She thought of what Dr. Ortiz had said. You can hold compassion without inviting harm. She exhaled. Then she typed, Hi, Lily. Thank you for reaching out. I imagine this email wasn't easy to write. I'm open to coffee. One conversation. No expectations beyond honesty. There's a cafe in Sweet Auburn I like. Sol and Steam. Saturday at 10? Maya. She hit send before she could overthink it. Sol and Steam smelled like roasted beans and citrus zest, like warmth and second chances. Murals of Black writers, activists, and artists covered the walls, their faces bold and unflinching. Sunlight poured through tall windows, pooling on the worn floorboards. Maya arrived a few minutes early, ordered a chai latte, and chose a small round table near the back, beneath a painted portrait of Audre Lorde. Her chest felt tight, but not with dread, more with anticipation of a conversation she hadn't known she needed until the email arrived. At 10:04, the bell above the door chimed. Lily stepped inside, pausing just long enough for her eyes to adjust. She looked different, less polished, more real. Her hair was swept into a loose knot, wisps escaping around her face. The faint, almost imperceptible fragility Maya remembered from that night had been replaced by something else, a tired steadiness. She spotted Maya and made her way over, clutching a reusable cup like a talisman. Hi, she said, voice quiet but clear. Thank you for meeting me. Hi, Lily, Maya replied, offering a small smile. Have a seat. They sat. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not quite awkward, but full. Up close, Lily's eyes looked older than her years. There were faint shadows beneath them, the kind earned more by emotion than by lack of sleep. I've replayed that night so many times, Lily began, fingers curling around her cup. Not the parts with him, the parts with you. Maya tilted her head. What do you remember? Lily let out a breath that trembled at the edges. I remember thinking you were the most composed person I'd ever met, she said. Like you'd become the eye of your own hurricane. I remember you telling me it wasn't entirely my fault and wanting to argue with you because it felt like it was. Like all of it was. Like I'd broken something sacred, she swallowed. And I remember realizing, too late, that I had walked into a story that was never actually mine to begin with. Maya listened, hands folded, letting the words settle. What happened after? She asked gently. For you. Lily laughed once, but there was no humor in it. He fired me, she said. 2 weeks later, said the situation had become a distraction. HR phrased it more nicely. Incompatible directions. Professional boundaries, all that. Maya's jaw tightened. Of course he did. I thought I was prepared, Lily went on, but I wasn't. Word got around faster than I could catch it. I was the girl who slept with her boss. I applied for roles and felt the temperature in the room change when they saw his company on my resume. She traced the rim of her cup with her thumb. I've been freelancing, barely, doing small contracts, faking confidence on Zoom calls while wondering if anyone will ever look at me and not think of him. Maya felt a pang, not of guilt, but of recognition. Different circumstances, same pattern. A man's choices written across a woman's reputation in ink that wouldn't wash off easily. Did he ever apologize? She asked quietly. To you? Lily huffed. He said he never meant for it to go that far, as if the affair had grown legs and walked itself into hotel rooms. He said he cared about me, that he'd tried to fight it. She rolled her eyes, anger flashing through the weariness. It was like listening to someone narrate a movie they thought they were the hero of. A small, rueful smile tugged at Maya's lips. That sounds familiar. Lily looked up, their gazes locking. I knew he was married, she said, the words thick with shame. I knew. I told myself their relationship was dying, that I was just something inevitable, that I was special enough to rewrite his story. I carried that arrogance like a shield and used it to ignore the part of me that kept whispering, this isn't right. Maya nodded slowly. We're all good at telling ourselves stories that protect what we want. Tears glossed Lily's eyes, though she blinked them back. When you looked at me that night and didn't tear me apart, she said, voice breaking, it was worse in a way. I expected you to scream. I would have deserved it. Instead, you held him accountable and told me, this isn't entirely your fault. I didn't believe you. I do now. Maya's throat tightened. She took a sip of chai, searching for the words that felt true. Lily, she said, you made a choice, several. You have to own that. So does he. The difference is he had more power. In age, in position, in the dynamics of your workplace. He understood the consequences. He'd rehearsed this before. You were still convincing yourself he was the exception. Lily let out a long breath. I wanted him to be exceptional, she admitted. I think I was more in love with the idea of being chosen by someone important than with who he actually was. Maya thought of her own reflection in the mirrored elevator that night, of the woman who had loved Ethan's potential so fiercely she'd almost forgotten to audit his reality. We all do that sometimes, she murmured. Fall in love with an idea so bright it blinds us to the shadows attached to it. They sat quietly for a moment, the cafe's gentle clatter and murmur flowing around them. What are you doing now? Maya asked. With your work, I mean. Trying to rebuild, Lily said. Mostly UX contracts, small nonprofits, local businesses, a few startups that don't mind my history or don't dig that deep. I'm good at what I do, she added almost defensively. I know that sounds arrogant, but it's one of the few things I'm sure of. It doesn't sound arrogant, Maya said. It sounds accurate. Lily stared at her, as if trying to translate the unexpected compliment. Sometimes I wonder, Lily continued slowly, if my career is permanently marked by this. If every room I walk into, people will see me as a risk instead of a resource. Some will, Maya said honestly. Some won't. The question is, what spaces do you want to build, where you don't have to keep atoning just to stand in them? Lily blinked, the thought landing with visible force. Why are you being kind to me? She asked in a low voice, the question raw. You don't owe me that. I helped hurt you. I made you collateral damage in my delusion. Maya looked at her for a long moment, taking in the slump of her shoulders, the way her hands hadn't quite stopped trembling. Because, she said, you're not my enemy. Lily swallowed. I was complicit. Yes, Maya acknowledged. And you're also a woman who got pulled into a dynamic that fed on your insecurity and your need to be seen. He had power. You had youth. Both of you used what you had. The difference is only one of you built a life on the vow he was betraying. Lily's eyes shone again. So that's it? She whispered. You forgive me? Maya considered. Forgiveness is complicated, she said. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I don't wish you harm. And I refuse to let a man like Ethan be the axis around which we orbit for the rest of our lives. They fell quiet again, the kind that didn't feel quite like peace, but wasn't war either. Maya glanced at her watch, then back at Lily. You said you're freelancing, she began. UX for nonprofits and small orgs. Yes, Lily said cautiously. I've taken on a few clients lately, Maya continued. Cultural organizations, community projects, a museum partnership or two. They need digital experiences that actually respect the people using them. Accessibility, clarity, empathy. That's not most agencies' strength. She held Lily's gaze. But it might be yours. A flicker of confusion crossed Lily's face, chased quickly by disbelief. Are you offering me work? She asked. I'm offering you a contract, Maya said. Short-term at first, project-based. You invoice me. No promises I can't keep. I bring the strategy and story. You bring the interface and experience. We see what we can build when we're not sacrificing ourselves for someone else's ego. Lily stared at her, stunned. Why would you trust me? Maya smiled, small and clear. I'm not asking you to hold my heart, she said. I'm asking you to design a user flow. Despite everything, a weak laugh escaped Lily's lips. Also, Maya added, her tone turning wry, he would hate it. And I've made peace with being motivated by more than one thing at once. Lily shook her head slowly, a smile tugging at her mouth for the first time that morning. You're serious, she said. I am, Maya replied. You're good. You were always good. I refuse to let the worst decision of your 20s be the only story that gets told about you. Lily's hand rose to her mouth, fingers pressing against her lips as if to hold something in. A sob, a disbelieving laugh, gratitude too big to swallow. Thank you, she managed, voice cracking. I won't let you regret it. I'm sure you won't, Maya said. And if you do, I have excellent boundaries now. They smiled at each other. Not as friends, not yet. Too much lay between them for that. But as something adjacent, a fragile new alliance forged not in shared betrayal, but in a shared refusal to stay broken. As they finalized details, scope, timelines, rates, Maya felt a strange, quiet rightness settle over the table. This, she thought, is what reclamation can look like. Not just taking back what was stolen, but building something new from the fragments, with people who have learned, at terrible cost, exactly what they will never allow again. 1 year after the night she detonated her marriage with a glass in her hand and truth on her tongue, Maya Jefferson stood in the vaulted atrium of the Atlanta Museum of Contemporary Culture, watching the final guests drift through the exhibition she had helped conceive from the ground up. Reclamation, women rewriting the narrative, her project, her vision, her name printed boldly on the entry wall, not as a supporting partner or silent contributor, but as the creative director and lead cultural strategist. The air hummed with soft music and low conversations, the kind that ripple through a space when art has unsettled, stirred, or awakened something in people. The geometric skylights cast fractured beams across polished floors, illuminating sculptures, installations, and immersive digital pieces created by artists from across the African diaspora. Maya walked slowly through the central gallery, drinking it in, not the art itself, which she had seen 100 times during curation meetings, but the way visitors reacted to it, the way they paused, the way they breathed deeper, the way they considered themselves more honestly in the reflection of someone else's story. Behind her, she heard familiar laughter. Naomi and Jordan stood near the entrance, hands intertwined, both beaming at her with the kind of pride that made Maya's chest warm. Priya was somewhere near the interactive tech installation, no doubt dissecting it for its interface flow, while Lily spoke with one of the curators, animated, confident, every trace of her former uncertainty replaced with the steadiness of someone who had rebuilt herself through work and accountability. A year ago, none of this had existed. A year ago, Maya had walked out of her old life carrying only a suitcase, a broken heart, and a burning certainty that she would no longer make herself small. Now she stood at the center of a world she had created from the ashes. She drifted deeper into the gallery, past a towering triptych painted in sweeping gold and charcoal strokes. It depicted a woman in three phases: shadowed, fractured, reborn. Kintsugi lines of gold threaded through the cracks, making her more luminous for having been broken. Maya stopped before it, breath catching softly. It was not her story, not literally, but she recognized herself in it nonetheless. As she stood there, the crowd thinning around her, a low, warm voice spoke at her side. "You chose the perfect placement for this piece." She turned. Gabriel Voss, curator from the Guggenheim, silver threaded through his dark hair, wearing a soft gray suit, smiled at her with eyes that saw her fully. They had worked together on several transnational cultural partnerships over the past months, their conversations shifting from professional to personal in slow, intentional increments. Tonight, he looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he admires deeply. Not as ornament, not as mystery, but as equal. "I wanted this to be the heart of the exhibition," she said. "The moment people understand what the show is trying to say." "And what is it trying to say?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "That breaking doesn't mean ending," Maya replied. "It means opportunity, transformation, permission." Gabriel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've transformed a lot in a year." "So have you," she teased lightly. He smiled, but gently. "Yes, but tonight we're talking about you. Have you taken a moment to really see what you built?" Maya exhaled slowly, letting her gaze sweep the room one more time. "I'm starting to." "Good," he said, "because the world is seeing it too." She felt warmth bloom deep in her chest. Not romantic flutter, something sturdier, quieter, like the beginnings of trust. They walked together through the gallery, side by side, not touching, no pressure, no defined future, just presence. Companionship grounded in respect and timing that didn't rush her healing. When they reached the end of the gallery, he paused. "Dinner next week?" he asked. "Only if you want to. Only if it feels like a choice, not an expectation." Maya held his gaze, appreciating the care in that phrasing. "I'd like that," she said softly, "but let's see where I am next week." "Perfect," he replied, unbothered. "Next week then, or not, you get to decide." After he stepped away to speak with a curator, Maya slipped out onto the museum's terrace, the night warm and fragrant with blooming magnolia. Atlanta glowed beneath her, streets alive with music, headlights threading through the city like illuminated veins. She leaned against the railing, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the night wrap around her. The past year unfolded in her mind in luminous fragments. The moment she left the loft, the nights of quiet mourning, the therapy sessions that stripped her down to truth, the first contract for Jefferson's studio, Lily's apology, and the unexpected alliance that became something like mutual redemption. Naomi's unwavering loyalty, her own voice, stronger now, steadier, returning in full. She had lost a marriage, yes, but she had reclaimed herself. And in that reclamation, she had gained a life far larger, far richer, far more honest than anything she had lived before. Her phone buzzed then, just once. She pulled it from her purse. A notification. A single text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the exhibition. I heard it's extraordinary." EC. For a heartbeat, she felt the old pull of habit, the reflex to respond, to offer closure, to soften. But the reflex passed like a small cloud over a bright sky. She deleted the message with a calm, unhurried swipe. She was not angry. She was not aching. She was simply done. Above her, A warm wind stirred, carrying the city's heartbeat through the terrace. Below her, people she loved and people she inspired mingled in a world she had helped shape. Beyond her, entire futures waited, unwritten but hers to choose. Maya Jefferson lifted her chin, breathing in the promise that shimmered in the humid night air. She had chosen herself, and the world had opened. Thank you for journeying through this story. If Maya's transformation, courage, and reclamation touched you, I'd love for you to like, comment, and follow for more deeply emotional, novel-like storytelling. Your support keeps these stories alive and allows many more to unfold.